We are ready to get started, but before we do, I want to inform everyone that the event, including the breakout rooms, will be recorded. We do have Spanish translation if you need it, so please let us know and I'll explain how to get to it when we get to explaining Zoom. And with that, we are ready to get started. And to kick us off, I want to introduce Michelle Russell, the Acting Director of the Prince George's County Department of the Environment, to make opening remarks. Michelle, good evening.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first of 3 community-wide stakeholder engagement virtual meetings for the county's climate action planning process. As acting director of the Department of the Environment, I am a lifelong county resident, I must add. I am very excited that DOE is the lead agency for the county's climate action planning process. I would like to thank the Metropolitan Council of Governments for their continued support and partnership within the county throughout this process. I would additionally like to take a moment to acknowledge the attendance of the county council members at this meeting. I think we have Council Member Denoga, Council Member Galeros, and Council Member Ivy. Thank you for joining us. The growing impacts of climate change is real. On July 28, 2020, the Washington, D.C. area experienced the 26 days of straight 90-degree weather or greater. And that surpassed the previous record from July of 2011, where we had 25 days of 90-degree weather. On September 10, 2020, Hyattsville, Riverdale, and Mount Rainier communities experienced a rainfall that unleashed more than 6 inches of rain in less than 2 hours. The summer of 2020 was the hottest on record for Prince George's County. These types of extreme weather conditions are driven by climate change and directly impact our residents and our businesses. Climate change is not a future problem which the next generation can handle. Climate change is happening now and needs to be addressed now. The Prince George's County Council acknowledged this crisis and passed Council Resolution CR 7/2020, mandating the creation of the Climate Action Commission. The commission's primary function is to develop a climate action plan for Prince George's County by September 30th, 2021. The timeline to create an actionable plan is intentionally brief and very ambitious. This is just one of many steps that our county, state, our nation, and the world must take to make a difference. As stated before, the goal to develop a climate action plan draft for Prince George's County is due September 30th, 2021. It's an ambitious deadline, as I stated before, but for DOE, the agency responsible for the stewardship of our beautiful county's environment and natural resources, the deadline is necessary due to the serious and growing consequences of climate changes to our county. As part of the county's climate action planning process, community feedback and participation will be critical in helping us identify actionable and adaptable strategies for our county. In closing, this virtual public meeting is one of many ways DOE will continue to support ongoing collaborative and inclusive community engagement processes for our county climate action planning process. Now it gives me great pleasure to turn the presentation over, I should say, to Dawn Hawkins Nixon, who is our Associate Director for Sustainability Services Division within DOE, and also the chair of the Climate Action Commission. I want to say committee for some reason, commission. Dawn?
Oh, Michelle, thank you for your support of our county's climate action planning process. I want to open my statement, my remarks, by reminding everyone that this is not an official Climate Action Commission meeting tonight, but rather it is a community meeting for us to hear from you, the community. So while there are commissioners in attendance, we are here to listen to the community because this is your meeting for you to share with us your thoughts and your concerns. Prince George's County's Climate Action Plan must be fact-based and actionable at a local level, and you'll hear more about that in the presentation. Time is of the essence, and as our acting director has expressed, our schedule is condensed and it's ambitious, but we do believe that we can deliver a draft to the county council by the deadline, the due date of September 30th of this year, 2021. Please note that planning and preparing for climate change is a process. The first of many steps to come is just beginning with step one, preparing this first plan for the county for climate action. Please feel free to reach out to the Department of the Environment with any questions or with any requests. We are here to help, as this plan is not just about government operations. This is a community-wide climate action plan. We have assembled a great team to help us navigate our way to developing that plan, starting with our commissioners who are very knowledgeable, who've been involved in climate action planning over the course of years. We also have the support of our consultant team, including the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, the CATMUS Group, JSA, and the Environmental Finance Center of the University of Maryland. This, of course, would not be possible without the support of our county executive and the county council. I hope that you will learn a lot this evening. You will learn something from this meeting, as we hope we will learn from you. On behalf of the commission, we hope you will enjoy our first climate action community engagement meeting. And I will now turn this over to Donzel.
Thank you so much to both of you for that welcome and for really setting the stage for this meeting. And thank you everyone for joining us and taking time out of your evening to be with us this evening. And while we've been doing virtual meetings for close to a year, making sure it all comes together and making sure everyone is part of the conversation is still a bit of an experience and an experiment for that matter. And to give us all some predictability on how tonight will go, I want to go through the agenda. So of course, you know, we've done the welcome and we're reviewing the process now. Once we finish that, we will take a couple of polls to see who's in the room, who showed up today. And then we'll get right into the presentation. We'll begin to talk about the plan itself and the guiding principles for the plan. Then we'll transition into the climate change in the county, as well as, you know, we'll kind of wrap up with the climate risk and adaptation actions. Now, after each of the presentations, or close to the end of each presentation, we will have some polls and allow for some questions. But I want to kind of just note now that the majority of our questions will happen during the breakout discussion, where we'll have a guided conversation along with questions. So what we need you to do is make sure you're putting your questions into the chat as we go. When we get to the end of the presentation, those questions that couldn't be answered in the chat right away because they may have involved a more nuanced or detailed response, we will pick a few of those to answer at the end of each segment, and then we will make sure to, you know, capture them all and get answers out, whether it's at the end of the meeting or in future correspondence, including the website. So at this point, and I see you all already entering the chat, which is awesome, I want to kind of talk about how we do this Zoom thing. So at the bottom of your screen, as you can see, we all have, and you've been doing virtual meetings, you have to the far left your microphone and your camera. During the presentation, we are asking that you keep yourselves on mute. When we go into the breakouts and we have more opportunity for questions, you will be guided on when to come off mute and ask questions and be a part of that conversation. But during this part of the presentation, we do want to make sure everyone is on mute. If you are having technical problems, we do have an individual here to support you all with those, provide technical assistance. His name is Brendan. So we're going to put his email in the chat for if any reason you need it. And if you need to speak to him directly, if you provide him with the number, we can make sure that happens. As we kind of scroll along, if you want to know who's in the room, you can click on participants. You will be able to, again, use the chat to answer any, ask any questions that you have, and also follow the questions that other attendees of the meeting are asking. And then, of course, when we get to it, we'll use the breakout rooms. And finally, we have interpretation services in Spanish. So I saw a note that says, that it was an issue, and we are going to work through that. I'm glad that we do have individuals who are using it. But simply click on the globe, and it will begin to support the underlying, provide you with the underlying feed so you can hear both the presentation and the Spanish interpretation at the same time. So I think with that, we are ready to get into our next slide and our first, right, so it's the ground rules. So in order for this, to make sure that we do this smoothly, and again, like I said, it's a bit of an experience to make sure everyone can be part of the conversation. We are asking you to adhere to just a few ground rules. And so the first one is, there is no question that is off limits. I think Don and Michelle both talked about, we want to hear your concerns about the environment, about weather, about flooding, and we'll get into that throughout the presentation. When we get into our breakouts, we want everyone to speak openly and honestly, but we also want to make sure that you're listening carefully and respectfully to each person, especially if they have different opinions. We want to try to keep comments brief so that everyone has an opportunity to make them. So, some of us tend to lean a little more forward in conversations. We're going to ask you to lean back a little bit. And for some of us who tend to sit back in conversation and observe, we're going to ask you to lean in and join by giving us your thoughts and comments. We hope to be able to explore differences. That's what this is about. And we hope to be able to do that respectfully. And most importantly, out of those differences, find areas of agreement or common ground. So if we are able to do that, I think we will have a successful meeting, and I look forward to getting into it. So now let's see who's in the room. So what we want to do here is check in on our first poll. Now, the way we've done this poll question, so there are a couple of questions, is we want to know, how are you connected to Prince George's County? Do you live in the county, work in the county, worship in the county, own a business in the county, shop in the county? Hopefully all of the above, but some is none, and you just are interested in the environmental part. So while I'm explaining, Phil, you will always be able to fill in the questions. We try to give you a minute or so, or at least 80% before we begin to publish the results. But again, you can click as many of them as that apply, whether you live, work, worship, own a business, or shop in the county. We look forward to that. So we're just at about 76% and 77%, and we have about 50. We're going to close, we're at 80, so we're going to get ready to close it and publish it. So great. It looks like, a majority of the people live in Prince George's County who are participating. And, beyond that, we have individuals who live in the county is at 82%. And of course, those who shop in the county, which is good for our economic base, hopefully as we increase our revenue, we can decrease our taxes. I'm sorry, I'm talking as a resident there, and I see the council member Denoga, so that's what made me say it. How are you this evening, sir? We shop in the county, and we also combine with our work and worship, and up 10% of those participating actually own businesses in the county as well. So that's good to see. Let's go to our next question. Did we lose the poll? There we are. So next thing we want to know is if you are a resident in Prince George's County, where do you live? And if you are not a resident, where do you spend most of your time? So you can say, or you could just simply say you're not a resident. So the way we've divided this is we have inside the Beltway, Prince George's County, and then we have outside the Beltway, north, central, and southern. So north would be above 50 outside the Beltway. Central Prince George's County would be between 50 and Route 4, Pennsylvania Avenue. And South County would be anything below. So as we head into Akankee and Waldorf, towards Waldorf, that's what we mean by South. So where do you reside and where do you spend your time? And we're just about at 80% and we're at a minute. So it looks like most of those participating live North County. We're at 34%. And then we have 16%, about 20 individuals who live in the Central County outside the Beltway. We have 23% that live inside the Beltway. And we have 10% that live South County. But surprisingly, we have 17% that are not residents. So welcome, and it's good to see you all. And we look forward to hearing all of the voices of those who are stakeholders in the Prince George's County climate process. Great. So our next poll question is, what is the race or ethnicity that you identify as? So we have African American and Black, white, non-Hispanic, Hispanic, ethnicity of various races, Asian, Native American, more than one race or ethnicity or other that you identify with. And we appreciate the comments, and we hope that everyone is also selecting their on the poll itself. So we are at 81%, but we're going to give you all another 15 seconds for those who are still responding. Okay, so it looks like we have 29 or 30, right at 30% that are African American. We have 57% that are white, non-Hispanic. We have a 6% Hispanic representation, a 2% Asian representation, and a 8% of Native American, more than one race and other. Great. Thank you all so much for allowing us to kind of get to know who's here and who's in the room. And I think we have one more, which is, are you male or female? Or other? We're going to give it another 20 seconds or so. And I really appreciate seeing people already putting their thoughts and comments in the chat. Keep doing that as we go. So it looks like this one actually aligns with the demographics of the county when you get into the older population. So we have 60%, 62% female, 37% male, and 2% of those who identify as other. So thank you all for that. So we have another poll which asks your age. So are you under, for 15 to 19, 20 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 45 to 54, 55 to 64, or 65 or better? So please let us know the age demographic that are here this evening. And I'm glad to see a representation of those that are 15 to 19. You know, it's always good to you get youth to participate. I'm gonna give you another 10 seconds or so. It looks like, you know, we measure this in our scientific method of popcorn popping. It looks like it's kind of settled. So we're gonna close that. So here our highest representation is 65 or better at 36%. And then 55 to 64 at 21%. And, you know, when we combine 45 and above, we are just about 70% total. And then 44 and below are the remaining 30%. Great. So we really appreciate you all providing that poll information for us. And it really just allows us to know, one, who have we reached, and two, who do we need to reach as we move forward. Excellent. So I think we are now ready to shift gears and get right into the presentation itself. So to talk about the guiding principles for the climate action plan, I'm going to turn it over to Deborah Perry of Canvas. Deborah, good evening.
Thank you, Donzel, and thank you, everyone. It's really great to be here tonight. I wish we were all together in person, but I'll take this as the next best thing. So if you want to go to the next slide, I'm with the Cadmus Group. My name is Deb Perry, and we are supporting the county and helping to develop the Climate Action Plan. And we always suggest when you start out on such a big process that you try to establish some kind of big picture visionary principles to really help you guide the kinds of actions, the kinds of implementation that you want, and to try to set some bounds for the plan and for the process. So these are the guiding principles. They are really central to the vision of a climate action plan. They're intended to reflect the values of the community and to ultimately prioritize or to inform what gets prioritized in the process. So I'm going to walk through a set of draft guiding principles. These have been developed by the Climate Action Commission in collaboration with the county staff. These are something we're very much looking for feedback on and hoping that tonight both we can get a sense of whether folks feel like these guiding principles reflect the goals and values of the community, any changes that we should make. We will have a poll on this after I talk through them, and also encourage you to go to give us feedback at our virtual open house if you want to think more about these or give us more detailed feedback. If you want to go to the next slide. So as I said, guiding principles are meant to be visionary and fairly high level, and they help to identify the kinds of actions that you'll want to take. So first guiding principle, that the actions will be feasible and actionable. That the county will prioritize actions that are specific and technologically, financially, and legislatively feasible. The priorities, again, will have specific next steps towards implementation in a time period, maybe in the next 5 years. Again, the focus here is on things that are feasible and actionable. The second guiding principle is about being bold and ambitious. Recognizing that climate change is a big problem that requires bold and ambitious action. So this guiding principle states that the county would pursue an ambitious set of actions that establish the county as a regional leader and that acknowledge that a business as usual approach won't be adequate for addressing the challenges posed by climate change. If you can go to the next slide. The third guiding principle is that the climate action plan will be evidence-based and impactful. That will use the best available data to guide the development and the prioritization of actions, and that will prioritize actions that have the greatest impact in terms of greenhouse gas emissions reduction, climate change preparedness, and other benefits like economic development, public health, and social equity. The next principle is that the plan will be equitable and inclusive. Recognize that climate change will have its greatest impacts on communities that are already overburdened with health disparities and economic challenges. So the county would prioritize actions for equitable outcomes, identifying strategies that ease the adverse impacts of that change, and investing in communities with the greatest needs. If you can go to the next slide. We have a guiding principle that the plan will be transparent and verifiable. It will develop a plan that both follows an open decision-making process and ensures that progress toward the goals of that plan be tracked accurately and using specific metrics. That this will be a fact-based climate action plan. The next guiding principle is to be comprehensive and integrated. So to pursue a set of actions that acknowledges and addresses the interactive effects across sectors, work across sectors to meet common goals and achieve efficiencies whenever possible. I think so I've covered each of these 6 guiding principles, and I think now I'll turn it back to Donzel to get some feedback on those.
Thank you, Deb. So now that you've had a chance to hear the principles that guide the actions that the commission will take, we want to know for each of the principles if they resonate with you and reflect your goals and values as individuals invested in the climate action plan for Prince George's County. So what we're going to do is we're going to, put the 6 different principles up, and we're going to ask you to, for each of them, to let us know if you strongly agree, which is 5, agree, which is 4, if you're neutral or ambivalent towards that principle, which is 3, if you disagree with the principle, or 2, or if you strongly disagree, 1. So please feel free to begin to look at each of the 6 guiding principles and note whether or not you strongly agree, are neutral, disagree, or strongly disagree with that principle. And as you begin to fill out the first one, please be sure, if you have to scroll down the poll, because you are going to answer that question for all 6. And since there are 6, we're going to give you a little more time to provide your answer, your response. Again, you are letting us know if the principles resonate with you as a stakeholder, someone who's invested, and if they reflect your goals and values, and reflect the goals and values that should be applied by the commission. And again, there are 6 goals, and we ask you to respond for each of them. So you may need to scroll through the poll. Okay, we're gonna give it another 30 seconds. Please make sure you respond to all 6. And let's see what our results are. Great, so with regard to feasible and actionable, 39%, actually close to 76% felt agreed or strongly agreed, 15% were neutral, and 10% either disagreed or strongly disagreed. With regards to bold and ambitious, it looks like 78% of you all there either agreed or strongly agreed, 15% were neutral, or 8% were disagreed or strongly disagreed. With regard to evidence-based and impactful, there 83% of you agreed or strongly agreed, 11% were neutral, and 6% were disagreed or strongly disagreed. With regard to equitable and inclusive, we have 81% either agreed or strongly agreed, 13% were neutral, and 6% were disagreed or strongly disagreed. And with transparent and verifiable, that one 79% agreed or strongly agreed, 13% were neutral, and 8% were disagreed or strongly disagreed. And with regards to comprehensive and integrated, 75% of you all agreed or strongly agreed, 20% were neutral, and 6% of you either disagreed or strongly disagreed. So we really appreciate you all giving us that feedback, and I'm going to quickly turn it back over to Deb to talk about how that will be applied in next steps.
Thanks, Donzel. Go to just the next slide. Again, those were our draft guiding principles. And so we will, following this meeting, be revisiting those. And as I said before, we have the virtual open house, which is shown here on the slide. And also Kayla from JSA posted a link in the chat. If you haven't had a chance to check out the virtual open house, we strongly encourage you to go there. It's a cool way that we can feel like we all went to go check out materials on this project. And the full narrative of each of the guiding principles is there, along with a comment box where you can leave your own thoughts and ideas and feedback for us. So please do let us know what you think. I'd also encourage you this evening in the breakouts, when we talk about actions, to maybe think about some of those guiding principles as a way to think about potential actions. You know, things that are actionable and feasible, impactful, equitable, inclusive. I think these are the kinds of actions that we're looking to identify, and would love to hear your ideas about those actions. Thank you so much.
Great. So it looks like we have one question at this time. And again, I just want to reiterate and remind folks, please put your questions in the chat. And we will make sure we get an answer. So we had a question during that time of will the presentation be shared, and it was responded that it absolutely will. I know there have been some other questions that, you know, and so just so, you know, we just be fully transparent. We have a team of folks who are tracking the chat and tracking the questions. And so there may be some questions that were put in the chat now, which are covered in other parts of the presentation. So we will make, you know, so some of those are being held for that part of the presentation. But if you have a question that is, you know, you feel like was pertinent to the section that we're talking about and it wasn't answered, please put it in the chat again, and we will make sure we get to it. So we are seeing your questions, and we are tracking them, and some of them will be held until they're, you know, to be answered in the section that covers that area. So thank you all so much. So that was the only question we have for this part. So I think we are ready to transition to the next element of our presentation. And I apologize, we have a little bit of a lag on our transition in slides, but we're working on that as well. So next I want to turn it over to Aurora, who's going to talk about climate change in the county. Aurora, good evening.
Hi, Donzel. Thanks for that. Hi, everyone. As Donzel said, I'm Aurora Eatington, and like Deb, I'm from the Cadmus group, and I'm excited to present on climate change in the county. So if you go to the next slide, I have a really high-level agenda so you know where we're going over the next 15 minutes. I'm going to start with a really high-level overview of climate change, just to make sure we're all on the same page moving forward. I'll talk a little bit about the climate action planning process and some of the context around that. And then I'll conclude with a quick overview of sources of greenhouse gas emissions in Prince George's County. So if you can go to the next slide after this one. You know, what is climate change? I have a sense most folks on this webinar may know, but in essence, it's defined as the long-term change of a region's average conditions over time. So indeed, as Ms. Russell actually spoke to at the opening of this webinar, there's evidence of climate change already in Prince George's County. And that includes, the increased frequency of rainfall events and extreme heat periods. And, climate change impacts every aspect of our lives, including health, current lifestyles, and of course our future. It doesn't have geographic boundaries. Part of the motivation for including this image here, showing the global recent temperature trends. And it'll become more evident as the years pass, according to scientists around the world. If we go to the next slide. What causes climate change? I've seen some comments in the chat speaking that you folks already know this, but the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is one of those primary causes of climate change. Carbon dioxide is one of the most common greenhouse gases and is released through human activity like burning fossil fuels in our cars and in our buildings. Methane, carbon dioxide is not the only greenhouse gas. Methane is a really key one as well. But, thankfully, people around the world and in Prince George's County are taking action to combat climate change and to ensure a safer and healthier future for themselves and for future generations to come. So from that, I'm going to go to the next section of this presentation to talk at a high level about climate action planning. So what is a climate action plan? In short, it's a roadmap that outlines the actions that a community can take to both reduce greenhouse gas emissions and prepare for the impacts of climate change. So note that while many climate action plans historically focus on reducing greenhouse gases, there's a growing recognition that climate change is already here and there are impacts unfolding in their communities, and they will most likely become more frequent. The Climate Action Commission is in turn developing a climate action plan that identifies actions to reduce emissions and prioritizes community-wide climate adaptation and resilience strategies to prepare the community for this changing climate. Note that, these actions, not only are reducing emissions and preparing for impacts, but they're also simultaneously intended to improve the quality of life of residents and enhance economic vitality. So if you go to the next slide, this is all building upon a lot of global and regional context. And some of the points here point to some activities going on in this area. Globally, there's the Paris Agreement, which is an international treaty on climate change, which is aiming to keep global temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius. At the state level in Maryland, in 2009, Maryland adopted the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Reduction Act, the GGRA. This is a law that requires the state to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 25% from a 2006 baseline by 2020, in a way, again, that emphasizes a positive impact on the economy and on residents' health. Notably, it was amended in 2015 to seek a greater reduction, a 40% reduction below 2006 levels by 2030. Note that in the Metro Washington region as well, there's activity in this area. The Metro Washington Council of Governments Climate and Energy Action Plan sets a target of a 50% reduction by 2030. And, this plan is a multi-sector, multi-agency plan that was really developed with a lot of stakeholder input from various state agencies and non-governmental organizations, and builds upon previous plans to really see what can happen in the Metro Washington area. If we go to the next slide, now we think with all of that in mind, everything that's going on, understanding the usefulness and need for a climate action plan at the county level is really key. And there are a variety of reasons for doing so. At the forefront of all these reasons, however, is that a county level plan can identify actions that are tailored to the needs and goals of the local community and really speak to actions that are within the control of stakeholders in the county and the local community. It's also important to the second bullet point to note that, in the recent past, there's certainly been a lack of federal leadership in climate change action. The US in 2017 ceased its participation in the Paris Agreement, and that actually had an effect on spurring a lot of local action on climate change. Some of the organizations that have been really active in this area are listed here: County Climate Coalition, We Are Still In, Global Covenant of Mayors, and many more. And so even though, positively, the Biden administration has since re-engaged in the Paris Agreement, local action continues to be a very important part of mitigating and adapting to climate change. So in this next slide, I just want to briefly talk to the differences between mitigation and adaptation. I've highlighted this a bit in my previous slides, but mitigation is really about reducing emissions as much as we can to slow the rate of global warming or climate change, whereas adaptation is taking those steps to live more comfortably with the effects of climate change or global warming. Some actions on the mitigation side include things like energy efficiency improvements, increasing renewable energy, improving access to sustainable transportation, and some of the other bullet points listed here. On the adaptation side, there are a variety of things that communities can do. So that includes preserving open space, thinking about land use changes in order to maximize resiliency for the community, and other items like flood mitigation or emergency response plans. Of course, in the middle here, there's also overlap between mitigation and adaptation actions. And so it's really important to think about, optimum kind of actions that can really benefit a community when thinking about the climate action plan. If you go to the next slide, at a very high level, this, encompasses the general climate action plan process. I would want to note, of course, this figure is mitigation action focused, but the same concept applies to adaptation and resilience. And so what is that concept that's being depicted here? First, to start this process off, there's a leadership commitment. And, this was certainly demonstrated with the county resolution to really start a climate action plan. From that, we have to look at where we are in terms of emissions. Again, speaking to the mitigation side. So, we have a process to inventory greenhouse gas emissions. Our partners over at COG are working on that, and I'll present on that in a couple slides. From that, we want to understand where emissions are coming from, work with the community to identify strategies, and really develop actions that we can think about and ultimately go to step 3 for developing a climate action plan. Once that's developed, the next step is to implement those policies and measures and actions that were identified. And then, of course, monitoring and verifying the results of those activities. Of course, it is a loop, and that's a really important component of a climate action plan because, it's a continuous loop. You're never done, and that's an important thing because climate change seeks, iterative development and, continuously evaluating the actions you're taking and what new might need to happen, what might need to be tweaked to improve what's going on in the future. This next section here, I'm going to present a little bit on greenhouse gas emissions. So before I show you kind of the pie chart of where we are right now, it's important to note there are 3 main sources of greenhouse gas emissions. These include electricity generation or the grid, buildings, and transportation. And for all of these sources, it's really key to understand that burning fossil fuels is the source of a lot of those emissions, most of them. In the electricity sector, it's burning fossil fuels and power plants. In the building sector, it's our heating fuels, so gas and heating oil, and heating oil to provide space and water heating. And then in transportation, of course, it's for fuel for our vehicles. So with that in mind, where are emissions coming from in Prince George's County? And of course, I want to note that COG has been instrumental in helping to pull together this inventory for the county, and essentially coming out of their analysis are these sources. So if you actually go to the next slide, I would like to just break these out in a really understandable, tangible way. So the largest source of emissions comes from the transportation sector. And this is primarily due to the fossil fuels that are powering transportation vehicles. The sectors to think about include, on-road vehicles, off-road vehicles, aviation, and rail. In the blue side of this pie chart, you see residential energy and commercial energy. What that really is is the building space and water heating and cooling that I mentioned before. The sources of this energy essentially includes electricity, natural gas, fuel oil, and liquefied petroleum gas. I really want to highlight this point of electricity, right? Because electricity isn't explicitly in this pie chart, but it's a really integral part to emissions because, whatever you're using to produce electricity could be emitting fossil fuels or it could not be. So it's a really key part of this transition. And then of course, there is this purple wedge at the bottom here, this other, which includes sectors like process and fugitive emissions, waste, agriculture, and water treatment. So it's key to think about those, but also note that they're a fairly small wedge when looking at the full pie. So again, I touched on some of these targets on a prior slide, but I think it's important to bring up again to remind everyone that there are a variety of targets that have been set at the state, region, and county level. So it's really key to consider, at the state level, there are targets to reduce emissions 40% by 2030. The region is looking to reduce 50% by 2030. And the county has a goal to reduce emissions 80% by 2050. So, this is really key. It's building on work that's already happened, goals that have been set, and there's a lot of motivation and impetus to really respond to climate change. So before I turn to a couple polling questions that Denzel will help me with, I want to preview that in these breakout groups, we are going to have 4 rooms, 3 of which will focus on these different sectors that I've touched on here. One will focus on buildings, one will focus on renewable energy for decarbonizing the electricity supply, and the third will focus on transportation. So, I welcome all of your thoughts and input, and I really hope for engaging breakout rooms there. Or breakout room conversation there. The 4th breakout room will focus on adapting to climate change, which my colleague Dave is going to present about actually after this presentation. So a lot more to come on that topic. But with that, I'll turn it over to Denzel to ask a couple polling questions.
Thank you, Aurora. And I just want to note, there's a lively conversation happening in the chat. We really appreciate it. We've talked about everything from the maglev project to, really asking some great questions. Some of you all have adopted to kind of putting question before, your questions so that we can begin able to quickly identify the questions from the comments. So we want you all to continue with the the comments and the chat. We really appreciate you all being fully engaged on the topic. But now that you've heard a bit about the climate action planning process and emissions, we would like to hear from you through 2 polling questions. So the first polling question asks, how have you personally, what steps have you personally taken to help reduce greenhouse gas emission? And of course, it's multiple choice. So we want you to answer as many of the options that apply, whether that is adding renewable energy to your home, retrofitting your home to be more efficient, volunteering for environmental groups, food composting, taking public transportation, shopping locally, and using sustainable food sources, recycling at home, and purchasing or leasing an electric car. So of these opportunities to personally help reduce greenhouse gas emission, we would love to know which have you done?
Well, I've done all of the above. I just filled out the little form.
There you go. So we want you to click them all for us.
We don't take public transportation, but if we did, we would. Renewable energy in the home or business we have. Retrofit the home for more energy efficient we have. volunteer in environmental groups. We do.
Did you take did you?
So thank you, Stanley, and thank you all who are responding through the poll. And we encourage everyone to respond through the poll so that we can track your answers. All right, so we're going to give you another 10 seconds. We're at 73%, which is great. It looks like it is almost there. All right, so what we have here is the highest option that people, or the action that people take, is recycling at home. And of course, Prince George's County has had a tremendous recycle program for quite some time. That is followed closely, that's at 95%, so nothing is really close to that. But it's the next one is to shop locally and purchase sustainable from sustainable sources. Volunteering. Third is volunteering from environmental groups. And then you see several that kind of hit the 50%, from taking public transportation, retrofitting the home, and food composting. And then we kind of round it out with renewable energy for home and business, as well as so that's our list. So thank you all, and if we can go to the next poll. And again, we're going to remind everyone to please mute. And the next poll is, in which areas would you like to prioritize dedicated action on reducing emissions in Prince George's County? And again, excuse me, this is a multiple choice question. Would you like to prioritize improving building envelopes to make them more energy efficient? Would you like to prioritize reducing fossil fuel usage in buildings? So oil, gas in the buildings. Increase the use of electric vehicles. Make transit and non-vehicle transportation options more accessible. Increase the electricity generation from renewable sources. And I apologize, the last one isn't quite coming clear. Expand composting and recycling program. So expand the recycling program to include composting, or as well as expanding the recycling program. And right now, Prince George's County has a single stream for most recycling. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and, we would like to get to 70% so that we can be on time, because we want to make sure you have as much time as possible in the breakouts. We're gonna close the poll and see where we are. So of course, the first thing is to increase electricity generation from renewable sources at 84%. That's followed by reduce fossil fuels use in buildings at 72%, and then coming in third is to make transit and non-vehicle transportation options more accessible at 68%. Great, thank you all so much for those polls, for answering. And now we do have a couple of questions that I'm gonna read out, and to continue to put your questions in the chat, and we'll make sure we get to them. So the first question, I'm gonna shoot this to Ben. It's from Chris Ben. And Chris asks, how will Prince George's County Department of the Environment, along with CADMIS and other partners, assess the impact of organizations, buildings, processes, transportation, landfills, companies, personal homes, and other infrastructure on climate conditions to understand the baseline within the county? So Ben.
Yeah, great question. So this is Ben Butterworth from CADMIS. Hi, everybody. Yeah, great question. So I think this question was asked before, like Aurora ran through all of her slides, but I think what Aurora was trying to capture from a greenhouse gas emissions perspective was a lot of what was encapsulated in this question. So we want to, really focus on all sectors of the economy and where emissions are coming from. So that includes, as you mentioned in your question, buildings, transportation, landfills, businesses, residents, kind of thinking about it all. So we're capturing it all in the greenhouse gas inventory. And that's been an effort that's been ongoing over the years, so we can track greenhouse gas emissions reduction trends in the county and track progress that the county is making to reducing emissions in all of these sectors. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Dave, who can talk about kind of thinking about establishing a baseline from an adaptation and resilience to climate change perspective.
Thanks, Ben. Hey, I'm Dave Hampton with Cadmus. From a perspective of climate resilience, I'll be talking about this a little bit more. We are conducting a climate risk and vulnerability analysis as part of the climate action plan that will speak directly to that question. So it's based a lot of it on the hazard mitigation plan, which is a lot of the assets. That's a 2017 plan that's got some updates. So we've got a list of those assets such as homes, critical infrastructure, but we also, during the process, we're going to have a workshop to talk with folks within the county and hopefully you folks giving us your input on what communities are most at risk as well, so that we can understand that. There are some equity emphasis area maps that will help inform us even further. So that's a good snapshot of what particularly at-risk populations there are out there. So that'll help fill in some of those gaps.
Great, thank you for that, Ben. So another question, and then I think we're going to do two here, and then we're going to get to to the next section. And again, I just want to remind everyone, you will have an opportunity to ask questions, and we will make sure in our correspondence, our report out that we, provide answers for all questions. But this is from Laura and Michael. I hope the plan will cover all sectors, not just electricity, but also transportation, food, agriculture, buildings, land use, business, zero waste, etc. So Ben, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you hand it off to whomever in the team.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren, Michael. So yeah, it's a great point. And climate action plans, kind of by their nature and by their definition, are really all-encompassing, cross-sectoral, interdisciplinary plans. So that's definitely a key focus here, is thinking about the connections between these different sectors, not just focusing on electricity, as you mentioned, but thinking about the connections to our transportation sector and thinking about food and agriculture, and thinking about how we use resources, from how we produce resources, how we get rid of resources through waste, and how we can kind of reduce emissions in all kind of sectors of the economy across Prince George's County. And then even more expansive beyond that, not just thinking about how we can reduce emissions, but how we can respond to the threats of climate change, whether it be flooding or heat risks, which my colleague Dave will be getting into in the next presentation.
Great. And so I know, we've got one more question in this section. We're going to go to the rest of the presentation. I know I've seen some great questions around asking about more information about, improving, in the envelope of buildings and, large scale food composting, and we will be answering those later and in the breakout. So please know we see all of your questions, but the final question for this section, Ben, is why don't you have any questions about creating natural habitat in your own yard to fight climate change? Earth care is important in this challenge. And yeah, totally agree, Maureen. So yeah, there's like a lot of things to think about when you're thinking about how can you make your yard as environmentally friendly as possible. So there's the aspect of sequestering carbon through trees and plants in your yard, as well as the soil. And then there's also thinking about how can you make your yard help in making the county adaptive to climate change. So flooding and stormwater runoff. So using natural plants and natural landscaping can kind of have a multi-pronged benefit. So it's definitely something we're considering when we're thinking through this plan. So it can make the county more adaptive to flooding and also help in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So definitely multiple benefits there, and definitely something we're thinking about when we're working with you all to develop this plan. Thank you so much. And so, like I said, there are many great questions. We are tracking those questions. We will provide answers at the end of the next presentation segment. And of course, there will be an opportunity to have a deeper dive discussion in the breakout rooms that Aurora mentioned at the end, and we'll explain that. But at this point, I do want to transition to Dave Hampton of Cadmus, who's going to talk about, you can advance the slide, who's going to talk about climate risks and climate adaptation. So Dave, good evening.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. I get to do the fun part here, which is pivoting to starting to pivot to those actions while talking first about some of the climate change impacts. If you can go to the next slide. So again, I'm Dave Hampton. I focus on climate resilience and adaptation at Cadmus. Director Russell spoke of the climate impacts that are affecting the county. Associate Director Hawkins Nixon and my colleague Aurora spoke about the climate action planning process. And what I want to do is challenge each of you to think of the CAP process, and that is your process, as that moment to turn these climate risks into opportunities to mitigate the impacts and make your homes, businesses, and communities climate ready. So some of these impacts that we're going to see in the county are a lot like we've seen in other parts of the country. If you've been paying attention to the news, the first one won't be a stranger. Extreme winter. We're going to see more periods of freezing cold, hazardous driving conditions, and then melting ice and snow can actually contribute to flooding as well. Drought. It's going to be drier for longer periods of time. Buildings might experience water service disruptions, as you might have seen in Texas. Drought contributes also to other natural hazard events such as wildfires and flash flooding. Speaking of flooding, sorry, I switched my slide there. Flooding, more buildings, infrastructure, and people will be exposed to floodwaters, and some can often occur during extreme weather such as winter. River, coastal, and flash flooding or nuisance flooding we'll touch on in a bit. And then severe storms, that's higher winds and more precipitation that's going to increase storm intensity and frequency. This includes lightning and thunderstorm, tornadoes leading to strong winds, hail, and flash flooding, which can lead to power outages, makes driving and walking in extreme rain or wind hazardous because of flooding, down trees and power lines, and then extreme heat. It's going to be hotter for long periods of time. Next slide. So we're going to get your impacts. Polling question, the top climate hazards. I'm going to turn it back to Donzel to see what your top concerns are.
Great, thank you, David. So we've launched the poll, so we want to understand, like Dave said, what are your top concerns, whether it's extreme heat or extreme precipitation or flooding, and while we were planning this out, we began to talk about like just standing water in Prince George's County in different places, or when the different rivers overflow and then that water not being able to go out again. So that may be an issue. Drought, extreme cold winter conditions, and of course severe wind and tornadoes, which also represent damage and power outage. So we want to hear from you, and we're going to give you we're going to keep this poll open for about 1 minute and 30 seconds, or we're halfway there. So we really want to hear from you. What of the climate hazards that you've heard are your top issues? Extreme heat, extreme precipitation and flooding, drought, cold winter conditions, severe wind and tornadoes. About 25 more seconds. We're going to close it in 10. Let's get these final answers in. And awesome, thank you all so much. So it looks like that the flooding, the precipitation is the top issue easily at 79%, followed by the extreme heat. Right? So we thank you for that, and again we are tracking all of these answers. So I'm going to quickly turn it back over to Dave to continue with the presentation. Dave, back to you.
Thank you, Donzel. So let's talk first about heat. It is indeed getting hot in here. Extreme heat, it's going to be hotter for longer periods of time. Number of extreme heat days, which is over 95 degrees, is going to increase. Heat waves are going to last longer and occur more frequently. And you can see on the map there toward the East County, especially the Southeast, and along the Patuxent, as well as in the inner beltway. That's the greatest increase that we're seeing. So buildings might experience brownouts and blackouts and require more cooling, and people are going to be subjected to that as well. Drought, that's short periods where the surface temperature is high and soil moisture is low. You had a flash drought, in 2018. where short periods of warm surface temperature and low rapid decreasing soil moisture happened. And also remember that this creates conditions that can encourage other extreme events such as wildfires. Flash flooding increases if severe drought is followed by a period of extreme precipitation. We saw this after the 2019 California fires, where heavy rains happened, and then fires, after the fires, the rains caused mudslides. Dry conditions can increase the likelihood that fires will occur, making water less available to fight fires. Next slide. It's also getting wet. So water hazards. So keep in mind that the source of flooding is important in order to mitigate the effects, to figure out where it's coming from. In the end, water is water. So in some cases, the actions are going to be similar. Think about riverine flooding. That's the Potomac and the Patuxent River, the western border and the eastern border of the county. Coastal, you may not think you've got coastal impacts because you're not technically on the coast, but the Chesapeake Bay does influence the rivers with tidal action. Flash and nuisance flooding, that's the most nuance, I guess the trickiest. It can come from neither the river nor the coast. It could be from a cloudburst event, and that's where nearly 4 inches falls during a 1 hour period. In September of last year, you had Route 50 flooding to 5 feet. You had cars floating, as you do in this picture here. That was 3 to 5 inches that fell of rain in 2 hours. And that's a lot of water at once. Urban drainage flooding is caused by limited sewer capacity. And think about all the asphalt and concrete from all the paved roads, a lot of buildings that contribute to making flooding worse. And this is often concentrated to North County, Upper Marlboro, the city of Laurel. These are heavily urbanized areas. They've got a lot of hard surfaces. Keep in mind, of the county's 118 equity emphasis areas, 72% are intersected by the floodplain, but only 4% of Prince George County properties are in floodplains. So it's a considerable concern, but it's not a huge number of properties. And I want to get you folks to start thinking about the potential actions such as better land use planning, transit-oriented development. Think of reducing pavement and concrete for cooler surface temperatures. Next slide. So extreme storms, that's another hazard. You've got extreme winter and extreme winds. This is not as common as the extreme heat events, but remember, we all saw it happen in Texas. So longer periods of unusually low temperatures, generally accompanied by high winds. You have a combination of snow and dangerous wind chills, low driving visibility, tree branches and power lines that can snap under ice. And then extreme winds, hurricanes, that directly hit Prince George's County are pretty rare, but there's the impact of nearby tropical storms, intense thunderstorms, and associated flooding events. So be thinking of those potential actions. Many are similar to what I talked about for the other extreme temperatures. You can have warming centers for at-risk people. Build your buildings to the most current codes, upgrading to more stringent codes, and making sure that at-risk, such as the elderly or non-English, know where their neighborhood emergency shelter location is and can get to it. Next slide, please. So what is risk? So we're doing an analysis. I mentioned the climate risk and vulnerability analysis, which will give us a snapshot of what those risks are, that is built on the hazard mitigation plan, a lot of work that the county has already done. We're going to be convening the people that manage a lot of the systems and the infrastructure that we're really most concerned about. But we need to hear from you folks, especially in the breakouts, about what assets, systems, and populations you're most concerned about and how to make them more climate resilient. And real quick, assets is the stuff that breaks, the big stuff, the dams, substation, bridges, facilities like schools and police stations, hospitals, systems, which can be electrical grid, a water or wastewater treatment, or it could be the school system. You know, you've got your school building, but you've got the whole school system. And then most importantly, for me personally, I think is populations, because a lot of the hazard mitigation plans tend to miss some of those populations. So we want to get those underrepresented populations. Also, systems and assets are run by people, and people are more flexible and responsive than buildings and roads. So people actually have a greater shot at increasing the adaptive capacity to a changing climate. Next slide, please. Looks like we got a polling question here because we want to remember that we're all at risk, but some of us are more at risk than others. I'll turn it over to Donzel to see what you folks think about your neighbors and others.
Thank you, Dave. So again, we know we're all at risk when it comes to the impact of extreme climate. But who do you believe is most at risk? Who do you worry about in your own family or those that you're connected to? And then when you think about countywide, who are you most worried about? Is it the elderly? Are there people with disabilities or limited mobility or hearing impairment, vision impairment? Is it individuals who are immigrants or asylum seekers or refugees? Is it non-English speakers? Is it civil employees or frontline workers? As we learned through COVID, those critical workers who have to go no matter what. Is it healthcare workers, the homeless population? Or is it multiple groups that are at an intersection of the hazards? So for instance, at risk of being flooded and or facing extreme heat or cold or other. So we're going to give you, again, we want to give this about 90 seconds, about a minute and a half. We're at 50%. So you could choose those that apply. We're going to give you, let's give it another 20 because it's multiple choice and we're almost on time. So give 20 seconds here. And again, great questions. Keep them coming. We are tracking them. We'll answer about 2 or 3, but again, we will be, you'll be able to go into the breakouts and have a more in-depth conversation around the issues. Okay, so let's see the results here. So, those that we're most concerned with are our elderly residents, right? Our seniors. And that is followed by a tie between people with disabilities and our homeless populations. So we really appreciate you taking the time to go through that. And I think we have one more poll before we turn it back over to Dave. And that is, for our poll, there we go. When you think about the regions or the areas of impact with regards to climate change, what area of the county are you most worried about? Is it the inside the Beltway? Is it the northern part of the county? Up towards Laurel, coming towards New Carrollton? Is it the central, when you have, just outside the Beltway in Mitchellville, all the way out to Bowie? Or is it South County where you have Surrattsville and Clinton and all those areas? So again, which part of the county are you most worried about? Inside the Beltway, outside the Beltway, north, central, or south? Again, we're going to give this about another 20 seconds. So please respond. And I just really appreciate the conversation that's happening. Ever since the governor announced the maglev and they've been doing the impact assessment, through the corridor, it's been a hot issue. I know that you all are talking about that. We can end the poll, but and we appreciate those who mark their questions with questions. So at 42%, the greatest concern is Prince George's County inside the Beltway, followed by South County, below Route 4, and then North County. So I live in Bowie area, so of course no one cares about us, but okay, I understand. So thank you all for that. And Dave, I'm going to turn it back over to you to continue with your presentation.
Sounds good. Thank you, Donzel. I'm trying to get my speaker notes back up. Oh, well. Sometimes technology gets the best of you. Let's just go with it. So my favorite part of this is pivoting to the solutions, which is the climate adaptations. We can do this through nature-based solutions, talking about natural systems, planting trees, stabilizing our water's edges with living systems, stormwater infrastructure, investing in that to make sure that it's not overtaxed by the additional extreme conditions that we're going to experience. Resilient energy systems, which is augmenting the electrical grid that we already have with independent systems, off-grid systems, as well renewable energy, and then building strong community support systems such as resilience hubs, ways of distributing food within communities. Next slide. So we've talked about the guiding principles. Deb walked you through those. You were able to contribute to those. And what we want to try to do is shape those actions, those adaptation actions, which we'll be talking about in the breakout sessions, with a special focus on those actions that the county can control, that the county can manage. So here's a quick example using extreme heat as the climate impact that we want to address. So the strategy, the blue bar there, is understanding countywide heat vulnerability and filling data gaps. An example action could be conducting a needs assessment, right? There's a guiding principle right there, equity. Collecting local downscaled temperature data. That photo on the right is somebody driving around in California with a sensor on their car doing local mapping to map local heat impacts. We've got a time frame and a cost, so it is feasible. Set a time frame, tell the cost so that it's something that's practicable. Another strategy, offering heat training to home health aides. The actions could be developing heat health module as part of training and education, or teaching health aides how to recognize the signs of heat stress and prevention strategies. Next slide. Resilience hubs, as I mentioned, that's a perfect example. These are facilities that can serve the community before, during, and after a hazardous event. Could be a cooling center during periods of extreme heat, could also be a warming center when it's really cold, and distributing food and water, as we saw happen in Texas. Opportunities, building on Prince George's County Energy Resilient Zones Initiative. That's an initiative that's already happening. Maybe we can link that to the energy efficiency initiatives and support solar and storage systems to enhance resiliency in the case of grid outages. Next slide. This is one of my favorites, nature-based solutions, using nature and the ability of natural systems to make communities more resilient. That's working with nature to create more resilient systems at different scales, blue-green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, sometimes we call it at the block and neighborhood scale. So that can include things that vary from reducing your hardscaping in your yard. There's a great program in New Orleans that's put together by the Urban Conservancy to incentivize people to jackhammer out concrete and plant more grass, or to put in rain gardens, or to tear up your driveway and make it soak up more rain. There's the ability of those natural materials to also sequester carbon, as Ben mentioned. And trees, just planting more trees. Did you know that a tree can mitigate 10 gallons of stormwater per inch of diameter, or 100 gallons it effectively sweats off or evapotranspires, is your fancy word for the evening, 100 gallons per day. So that's a wonderful example. Next slide. This is a great example of a constructed wetland. It's an integrated stormwater management practice where water is coming off of a bridge. It's being routed through this constructed wetland. So you see that curving space, the water goes through there. The walls that you see, the water has to move through those baffles. And then on the right, you've got these aquatic plants that are removing the pollutants, the suspended solids, before it gets to, next slide, please. Before it gets to a river. It's an adjoining river here, so that's a great example of a practice. So I want you to keep these ideas in mind when you go to the breakouts. Think of those actions that are going to speak to those guiding principles. So please stick with us for those breakout sessions. And back over to you, Donzel.
Dave, thank you so much. And I just want to take a moment to say, you know, the information that the Cadmus team put together for this presentation was awesome. So I really appreciate it. There were some things I absolutely knew, like, you know, Upper Marlboro flooding. If you've ever been to the courthouse or the CAB building after it rains, yes, Upper Marlboro floods. But if you would have told me that one of the hottest areas or had the hottest days was, you know, just below Croom Road in southern Prince George's County, I would have never believed that. So I never would have guessed that before this presentation. So thank you all so much. That was at top of mind, but Aurora, Deb, you all did a great job, and I really appreciate it. I look forward to, you know, the discussions that we'll have in the breakouts that are coming up. We do have a few questions first. The first question is from Henry, and it says, what is the climate impact of continued development, like residential and commercial, especially when it removes trees and rural and farming land? So Dave, I'm gonna toss that to you first, and then others. Again, what is the climate impact of continued development, like residential to commercial, especially when it removes trees and rural and farming lands?
That's a super question. As I mentioned, some of the impacts, so the flooding, which was one of your top polling hazards, is going to be heavily impacted from that. So oftentimes we see in the news sea level rise, which is definitely something that's occurring. It's something that is happening currently. It's going to happen increasingly in the future. So we do need to be concerned with that. But flooding that comes from rivers is also contributed. Overdevelopment and out of scale development contributes to that as well. There's something called blue sky flooding, where there's no rain, there's nothing happening, and it still floods. And this often comes from overdevelopment. If you've got too many hard surfaces, a lot of asphalt and concrete, it may have rained a week ago, but it takes a little while for it to show up in your basements, let's say. So that is something that one has to contend with. So removing trees, removing natural materials is something that impacts not only flood, but also the ambient temperature, the surface temperatures, right? If you're walking through some communities, it's going to feel hotter because you got fewer trees, you got less shaded surfaces. So great question.
No, and I appreciate the answer around blue sky flooding. I think most Prince George's, if with their sub pump going off all the time, or going out back, and like I said, and just having wet grass or walking trails. So I think that is a really great way of articulating that. We have a question that asks, how will the plan invest in communities with the greatest need, and specifically around the climate risk vulnerability assessment process? Equity emphasis areas, maps to help inform where the most climate, and maybe so let me just start with part A, which is how will the plan invest in communities with the greatest need?
Yeah, that's my bad. I actually started writing my answer in there. So part of the answer is through the climate risk and vulnerability analysis process. So doing this report, and then having a workshop. We're going to have a workshop with some of the infrastructure and asset operators so that we can make sure that we're not missing anything, because a lot of this material has come from the hazard mitigation plan, which is now 4 years old. Great plan, but we want to make sure everything's up to date and we're not missing anything. And then to continue to get you out there in the audience, residents of Prince George's County, your input in those most communities at greatest need. I mentioned the equity emphasis areas. These are maps that are produced by Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments that help inform where those needs are, and that really helps us out. But it is important to hear from you folks as well. So that's critical. And then in the actions, since equity is one of the key guiding principles, that's where it's going to happen too. So that is high on in the mix of criteria for us to choose those actions. So there's no way we're going to choose an action that doesn't speak to those most at risk and vulnerable populations.
Great, and I think we have time for one more before we get into the breakouts, and that is from Susan McCutcheon, which is, what is or are climate refugees?
That's a great and interesting question. Climate refugees are folks that have basically been forced against their will to move as a result of climate change. And this has happened throughout history. I mean, you think about the Grapes of Wrath. Those folks were climate refugees. They're climate refugees that are hitting our shores every day. People are on the move constantly. And this is sort of a constant in history. So it is, in some cases, you will see that there will be folks in your community. For example, I worked in Haiti after the earthquake in 2010. That wasn't necessarily climate, but there was also a hurricane that hit in 2018. So, in the Boston area, you have some Haitians that may have moved to the States, right? Could you call them climate refugees? I think you certainly can after the hurricane. And in some cases, folks are moving into areas where there is a different type of climate hazard. So that's something to make sure you want to address. If someone has moved as a result of climate impacts into a place where there are different climate impacts, such as flooding or extreme heat, that's something that you have to contend with as well. But really great and interesting question.
Thanks, Dave. So again, I think we are going to, at this point, we really want to give you all the time for the deep dive discussions, the discussions for the specific areas. So we're going to now transition to the breakout. So I want to give you a quick overview of that process, and then we will begin to give you the opportunity to go into the breakout. So we have 4 breakout rooms. The first room will be around the topic of buildings, thinking about how to reduce emissions in buildings and answer those questions about how do you improve the envelope of buildings. Then room 2 will be renewable energies and thinking about how to increase renewables and clean energy for the county. Transportation will be room 3, thinking about how to reduce emissions from vehicles and transportation. And then finally, adapting to the climate. And that is what can the county do as we think about those 100-year storms, which are now 10-year storms, right? And so, how can the county adapt to flooding and heat waves and other risks? Now, if the chat is any indication, I look forward to vigorous conversation in those rooms. We do have facilitators who will support those conversations. So we want to make sure you give them space, and you have the ability to self-select your room. So what you're going to do is at the bottom on the ribbon, you will see the 4 squares. If you look at the image here, if you click that, and then what you want to do is choose your room, and then you will pick the room that you want to go in, 1, 2, 3, or 4. If you are having difficulty choosing your room, just simply put in the chat what room you would like to go in, and our staff will begin to, support people who aren't able to join the room, get in there. So please feel free to choose the room you want to go in. If you want to jump between rooms, you will leave the room and then choose another room. So you will have an opportunity to kind of, go in more than one room, but we want you to get into one room now, because we're going to ask the facilitators who are already in there and ready to kind of begin to lead the conversation, and members of the technical team who are in there, who will have some slides and some additional information that they would want to set the conversation with. But we want to encourage everyone to please go into the breakout room. There's no programming for the main room during the breakouts. So if you want to continue with the conversation, we ask you to go there. And so what we're going to do is, we're going to give you another 4 minutes or so to get into a room, or we're going to support you by putting you in a room once you go. So a couple of things you can do. You can put in the chat what room you want to go into, or you can join the room that you would like to go into now.
I want to welcome folks as we're coming in. I think I'll give it another 30 seconds just to see if there are others who are joining us. It looks like there's still quite a few folks who are unassigned, so I'll give them just a moment. While we're doing that, I'll introduce myself quickly. I'm Kayla Elson. I'm with JSA, so the same company that you see Donzel and others, and we are supporting the conversations both in the breakout rooms, in this meeting writ large, and supporting Cadmus and the county in the community engagement aspect of this whole climate action plan. And again, welcome to folks who are coming in. I'll probably say it a couple times. Again, my name is Kayla Elson, and I'll just be supporting the conversation inside of this room tonight.
Do you want comments from us?
We will. I think I'm going to turn it over briefly to Ben Butterworth in just a moment from Cadmus, who wants to just set some context around the buildings and emissions as it relates to that before we dive into the conversation. But this is definitely the space where we are looking for comments from folks and really wanting to hear verbally from you all around these issues. And I think we have enough folks in at this point, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ben just to introduce a little bit about this breakout.
Great. Thanks, Kayla. So yeah, welcome to the Buildings Breakout. I'm Ben Butterworth from Cadmus. Great. So yeah, what opportunities do you see to increase the energy efficiency and reduce the reliance of fossil fuels in Prince George's County? So I'm going to present a few quick slides. But I want you all thinking about, what actions can be taken, other existing actions that can be improved upon or expanded, and what challenges need to be overcome to address greenhouse gas emissions in buildings in Prince George's County. So this pie chart just represents total greenhouse gas emissions from all sources in Prince George's County. So the yellow area of the pie chart being the percent of total emissions in the county from buildings. So, whether it be homes or businesses. And the blue area of the pie chart showing the percent of total emissions in the county from all other sources. So as you can see, about 45% of total emissions in the county are from buildings. And the two primary sources of emissions in buildings are electricity. This may be a review for many of you, but electricity used for air conditioning, lighting, appliances, and other electronic devices. And then natural gas used in buildings primarily for space heating, water heating, and cooking. So this pie chart represents total emissions from just buildings in Prince George's County, so a bit more of a zoom in than the previous pie chart. So starting at the top of the pie chart and going clockwise, that beige wedge is residential electricity. The orange wedge is electricity use in commercial buildings. The lighter gray wedge is emissions from natural gas in homes. The darker gray wedge is emissions from natural gas use in commercial buildings. And then the two smaller brown wedges are emissions from other fuels. So propane, heating oil, that make up a relatively small percent of total emissions from buildings. If you add up the beige and the orange wedges, you'll see you've got at about 60% of total building emissions are currently coming from electricity. If you add up the two gray wedges, you'll see that about 38% or 37 or 38% of total building emissions are coming from natural gas. The split is pretty even between residential and commercial buildings. So residential buildings make up just slightly over half of total buildings emissions, and commercial buildings make up just slightly under half of total emissions from buildings in Prince George's County. So when you're thinking about how to reduce emissions in buildings, there's kind of two key strategies that jump to mind. So energy efficiency and strategic electrification. So both energy efficiency and strategic electrification can help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce energy demand, and lower energy costs. So energy efficiency is really using less energy to perform the same task. So examples of this that might jump to mind are, upgrading to LED light bulbs from inefficient incandescent light bulbs, upgrading to more efficient equipment and appliances, for example, efficient furnaces or efficient refrigerators, increasing insulation and improving air sealing. So doing the best in your home to keep warm air in during the winter and keep cool air in the summer. And then strategic electrification is really thinking about how can we power equipment with electricity instead of fossil fuels in a way that reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So as Aurora talked about in her presentation, the grid is continuing to improve in terms of overall cleanliness. We're seeing progress shifting away from coal and natural gas-fired power plant electricity generation and more towards wind and solar. So as that grid continues to get cleaner, the argument for electrifying certain types of equipment starts to make a lot more sense from a greenhouse gas reduction perspective. So some of those examples including replacing natural gas furnaces with air source heat pumps, which are a really efficient way using minimal electricity to both heat and cool a building, and replacing natural gas hot water heaters with heat pump hot water heaters. Again, a really efficient way to heat water in a building. The pictures on the right, the one on the top is just some insulation in an attic, again, helping to keep that warm air in the winter and help keeping the cool air in the summer if you're running AC. And then in the bottom right there, you just see 2 air source heat pumps outside of a home, providing efficient source of heating and cooling in the summer. So the county's made a lot of great progress to date to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in buildings. And I just want to highlight 3 examples quickly. So the Clean Energy Program for energy efficiency and solar water heater grants. So these grants are available to residents in 9 designated neighborhoods that face economic, health, public safety, and educational challenges. And these are financial incentives up to $7,500. Helping to offset the cost to improve energy efficiency and install solar water heaters. Another program the county offers here is Energy Star certification and green leasing grants. So Energy Star, many of you may be familiar with it, but it's a program which provides certification to buildings which meet certain standards of energy efficiency. And the county is providing financial incentives to increase the number of Energy Star buildings, and also encouraging green leasing in the county. Green leasing is really setting up a lease so that both landlords and tenants benefit from energy efficiency improvements, both financially and in terms of comfort in the building. And finally, the county is doing a lot in terms of energy efficiency improvements in their own county buildings. So these improvements are generating over $1 million in energy savings annually for the county. They've made significant energy efficiency improvements at the Harriet Hunter Senior Center and other upgrades at other county facilities, including upgrades to LED lighting and the use of smart controls in heating and cooling systems to make them more efficient. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Kayla. We want to reserve the bulk of this time for discussion. So Kayla will helping lead a facilitated discussion around opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in buildings. So turn it over to Kayla.
Great, thanks, Ben. So again, we have around, if you saw the broadcasted message, around 20 minutes for discussion. So I really want to turn this back over to you all here for conversations. There's a few questions that we're looking really to hear from folks as far as what actions can really be taken to make it easier for residents and local businesses to upgrade energy efficiency, whether that's in your homes or your businesses and helping replace fossil fuel. And in thinking about these actions, again, being very action oriented, are there existing actions that need to be scaled up? Maybe there are new actions that are needed when we think about the emissions, and also potentially what challenges might need to be overcome to make implementation feasible or even possible around areas of Prince George's County. I'd encourage folks, this is a smaller group, so folks are either raising their hand or using the feature. That's helpful for me. But as folks have questions or if you just have comments, I'm opening the floor to anyone who just kind of like to begin. And I'll monitor the chat as well. But I see Will Ellis, if you had a question or a comment.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to mention that the Empire, Maryland programs that are administered by the utilities, that have been, going on and since 2008 is a great way to have any additional county programs supplement or add additional incentives to accelerate the energy savings and the GHG reduction from those particular programs. So I think energy efficiency is such an important low cost resource that should be accelerated within Prince George's County. And, the state of Maryland as a whole has set a goal to reduce energy usage by 2% annually. And I know within state legislation, those bills are ramping up towards 3%. And so if the county can, enhance incentives or offer additional programs that complement the work that is done through Empire, Maryland, that would be a great thing to help the county reach more ambitious goals. So thanks.
Thank you for that, Will. And just to note, we are capturing all of this so that it's something that is funneled to Cadmus and to the team as we move forward. So thank you. Belinda, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you so very much. One of the things is that I would like to see the county do to offer more programs to our seniors. Most of our seniors are living in their houses and they do need assistance and they do need help for these programs. But we have to realize that some of them are at that age where they don't know how to use the computer to apply for some of these grants. Some of them, it really is hard for them to hear about it. So it's a lot of homes with seniors who are on fixed income. Their homes are just about paid for. They're able to, just maybe meet the county taxes each year, but they need a lot of updates in his home. I think as a county, for someone who has been living, and most of the seniors have been living in our county or even of age in the United States period for 80 and 90 years old, we owe it to them to help them fix up their homes. I understand the homes may be passed down to kids or whatever, but they're still living here. There's still homes in our community. They still have something to do with the dollar amount as far as how the house is going to be praised in our community. And I think we should be really concerned and make sure we have programs to fix up some houses in the community where people cannot afford, not just the seniors for the low income, where people don't have enough. It's like, we may live in a house and we're struggling and, our income is not where it used to be. And yes, we may need some new siding. We may need a new roof, some insufficient windows and doors and stuff like that, but we just can't afford it. So it should be programs, more programs offered to these people in our county to make sure that the houses are updated so that when people ride through Prince George's County, they can have pride in their communities. So thank you for giving me the time to say that.
Of course. Thank you, Belinda. Joseph, I also noted you had a couple questions in the chat, but did you want to voice them?
Sure. I'll definitely start with question number 2. So I've been having lots of conversations with on a bill that would result in no more coal and gas plants being built in Prince George's County, which is very important. But through these conversations, it's clear that a lot of people really would actually want natural gas coming in, build more pipelines so that they can get natural gas into their homes for heating and cooking in particular. I mean, and I just want to see how you all are going to approach this issue, because it's not, there's going to be backlash, but we need to electrify everything, and that includes, my gas stove. I'm I've read up on all the literature, that says just how terrible it is for my health and my children's health to have this gas stove in my house. But I mean, there's been a lot of creative advertising over the years that's saying that burning methane in your house is, cooking with clean gas. How are you all going to approach that? How are you going to do some policies to, cut out the gas in residential?
Yeah. Ben, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, sure. No, it's a great point, Joseph. And I was actually just reading something about the kind of health impacts of gas stoves. So yeah, it's important to, I think, bring up these problems, not just from an environmental perspective, but speaking the language of people so different folks can get engaged. So coming at it from a public health perspective is a really good way to get folks on board. I know people are very sensitive around their gas cooktops. I know it's like one of the more sensitive topics. I think there are, other places to start that get folks a little less riled up. So with space heating and water heating, most folks don't even know how their home is heated or their water is heated anyway. So it's a little less of a contentious topic. But yeah, I think I agree with your point that, eventually we do have to get to that electrification if we do want to kind of reach carbon neutrality. So it is definitely like a long-term goal, and cooktops may be one of the kind of like later steps in that process, but it's definitely something you need to get to. And it's just key to kind of make it affordable for folks and really intervening at the time that equipment is failing. That's how it becomes cost effective, right? It's not cost effective to replace a 2-year-old furnace or a 2-year-old gas cooktop that was just installed, but having those resources available to folks when their water heater dies or their furnace dies, so they can think through the electrification options. And making that affordable to them, both through utility incentives and then potentially the county playing a role in supplementing those incentives to make it affordable to folks, so it's an appealing option.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Before Joseph, I had noticed you had more. Ben, do you mind while we have discussion if we can maybe take down the slides, that way we can see folks while we're talking? Do you mind?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. So others, just want to make sure we get some other voices in, and Joseph will come back around if we have time. But Councilmember Denoga.
I even hate to speak, but I saw in the chat, and it was in the chat earlier, people talking about building standards and better building standards, the BEPS. And I want to ask a question about that. My understanding is that the county claims, this would be DPI and DOE, in the past couple of years have adopted new building code standards that are national based, that are stronger on greenhouse emissions. So the question I would have for the consultants is, have you or will you look at what has been done and see whether it's the best standards of or whether we need to improve further? So I see a lot of our constituents raising that question. We need a good, honest answer as to where we stand. Because my understanding is we've improved, but have we improved enough? So that's a not rhetorical question, but a question not being answered right this minute unless you know the answer, but one we need to include as part of this plan. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councilmember Denoga. So yeah, I mean, the state has taken steps to kind of ratchet up the building code and the level of efficiency called for in the code. There's always opportunities to kind of ratchet the code up more on a local level. So whether that's thinking about an all-electric new construction REACH code, which is gaining popularity around the country. A lot of cities in California, for example, are adopting all-electric REACH codes. Some cities in Massachusetts have tried to ban natural gas in new construction with mixed results. I know it's part of the conversation that's happening in Montgomery County. So there's always ways to kind of push more aggressively, and that's something that local jurisdictions have control over. So it's really one of the levers they can use to kind of push progress forward on a climate change front. And you can also think about it in terms of different standards applied to different types of construction. So, a single family home might have to meet a lower standard than a large, 100, 200,000 square foot commercial building that might be built by a developer who has the finances to handle that extra additional cost that might come with some of the more enhanced standards. So it's all part of the conversation, definitely something we're thinking about.
Okay, I think the public needs to know for sure where we stand as part of this plan. It needs to be laid out in the plan, not be quiet so we can hear the residents speak.
Yeah, thank you for that, council member. Dan or AJ or both.
Hi, I'm AJ. I have a question about one of the county's programs, specifically the Commercial Property Improvement Program. I think it would be interesting to see programs like this include sustainability metrics in some of their grant applications. So it's the county matches anywhere from 50,000 to up to 350,000 for commercial improvements. And including in that grant application, like, are you going to do like energy improvements? So like if you're improving your windows, are they going to be energy efficient windows? Things like that, I think would be very beneficial.
Thank you for the suggestions. I want to make sure we have time for some more folks. So I see Ank or Anke, apologies if I'm on the name. And you are on mute. I'm going to ask to unmute. That way we can hear you.
Mute. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Pronunciation is Anke.
Thank you.
Okay. This is about residential buildings, mostly existing residential buildings. The experience is that it's very, very difficult to get anything done. And what you need is encouragement, financing, support. And I would urge to really think hard about this. The international experience is not great in this respect, that things get done. And we have a lot of low-income residents in the county that live in multifamily buildings. So that's, I think, really fairly hard not to crack. I don't think a green lease program will go anywhere much. Thank you.
Thank you. Sue, I see your hand raised as well.
Hi there, thank you. Mine is not so much a question, it's a comment about all the old buildings. How is there any possibility to repurpose them, or at least components in those buildings, rather than just raise a building and take all the bricks someplace and start somewhere else? I just like that a consideration, to repurpose what exists. Thank you.
Yeah, no, some great comments around either, targeting who we really need to reach, whether it's seniors or those in low income, and making sure we have strategies for the right folks, and also the ideas of, how can we be innovative when we think about buildings. Looking for any folks who may want to make a comment. Yeah, Kenneth.
To unmute. It seems to me that with a lot of buildings, especially multiple family buildings, which are like townhouses, row houses, have a heck of a lot of roof space, and I'm wondering if there's a way to arrange for joint ownership of solar panels, so that the whole buildings and all the units in them get the electricity provided, with the excess going to the grid, with the power companies then paying for that's not used. The other thing that I strongly advocate is the program many years ago to improve building envelopes. I remember when I was a homeowner in a different location, the county, Save Energy, had people you could call on to come in, inspect your home, and make recommendations to seal the windows, seal the gaps, put in more insulation. And that was pretty effective several years ago. My comments.
Jim, I noticed your hand is raised.
Thank you. I apologize. Because I lost audio, I missed most of this conversation, but I'm presuming nobody mentioned concrete. And the reason I'm bringing up concrete as a material that we have to get away from is if concrete were a nation, apparently it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases after the United States and China. So we need to move away from using concrete in our construction. There are lots of alternatives. There are new ways of engineering wood to build tall buildings, but we have to stop pouring concrete, especially in the structural frames of buildings. And I say that as an architect. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Others, I know we have some minutes left while we're in our breakout room. Gary, I noticed you had your hand up maybe earlier. You were doing visually a while back. I just wanted to check in if there was something you'd wanted to add to the conversation.
Well, obviously I'm one of the commissioners, so I'll simply say that I'm very pleased to see the references made in the earlier presentation to the wealth of county incentives that are available in a variety of areas. But in my experience, there's also a wealth of ignorance on behalf of the potential beneficiaries of these programs. Many of the incentives that local governments provide are frequently undersubscribed. And I can only hope that one of the lessons we learn out of this entire effort is a better way to communicate with the public, an example being tonight's meeting. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Allen, my apologies. And Joseph, we'll come back around. I know you had another question, another comment to raise.
Yes, and this one's on the commercial buildings. DC and I think Montgomery County too now have a program they call Building Energy Performance Standards, where they'll require existing buildings, existing commercial buildings to first start benchmarking their energy use and then continue to ratchet down over time. Have you looked at all at a program like that and implementing in Prince George's County, especially since other jurisdictions in the region have it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the ideas on the table that's been talked about at some of the commission meetings. So yeah, those programs are great in that you can kind of customize them to target the certain types of buildings that you want. So you can, for example, exclude small businesses so they're not held to the same standard that, like 100,000 or 200,000 square foot giant office building might be held to. And those larger commercial buildings are responsible for a large chunk of the energy. So getting those buildings to not only kind of benchmark, understand their energy use so they can flag themselves if they're kind of a large energy user, but then also tying it to requirements that if, you're not getting a certain...
We're about to get cut off.
In the community about transportation, a lot of great ideas. So I'm really excited to hear from you on opportunities to reduce emissions from the transportation in Prince George's County. So without spending too much time on me speaking, because I want to let you all speak, first I just wanted to focus back on where emissions are coming from. They are a significant portion of emissions in Prince George's County. And they're primarily from, the fuels that are powering our cars, buses, and trucks. Very high level overview here of different transportation sectors and some just, not at all actions by any means, but just some ideas to get the juices flowing. So on the left side, there are different sectors of vehicles and transportation you can think about. I've focused on just vehicles in these breakouts, but of course, I'm certain we'll hear about rail, buses, and aviation, of course, are other sectors to consider. But if we just think about vehicles, we have a couple classes here. So light duty vehicles, that's, our personal cars and trucks that we're driving around to get to work, to commute, pick up groceries, what have you. Medium duty vehicles, which encompass a lot of things, but you can think about, delivery vans and service vehicles as well as buses. And then you can also think about heavy duty trucks, including construction trucks, garbage trucks, long haul shipping. These are all types of different classes of vehicles that are currently contributing to emissions in the county. And of course, very high level overview of just some ideas of how to reduce vehicle emissions. Electrify vehicles. You can reduce kind of the number of vehicle trips. That's increased carpooling. There are a variety of fuel efficiency standards. You can increase that fuel economy and efficiency. And, of course, you can increase public transit accessibility, try to increase use through a variety of mechanisms. I'm interested to hear from you all on different ways to do that. And you can improve, infrastructure for non-vehicle travel. So biking, walking, micro mobility is a term people use sometimes to talk about items like this. Again, there are things going on in the county already. Just want to, highlight just some of them to, again, get your juices flowing, see what you're thinking. The county has a purchase of 8 electric vehicles on the books for the bus. They have a purchase for plug-in hybrid electric vehicles on the books, as well as installation to start installing electric vehicle charging stations. The County Council has also approved a green fleet policy and promotes the purchase of clean and efficient vehicles. So these are just some of the things that the county is doing already in this vein. But of course, there's a lot more to be done. And so with that, I'll just turn it right into discussion and over to Josh to help facilitate the conversation here and really hear from you all on what you're thinking in terms of transportation and the climate action plan and what you'd like to see in terms of actions.
Great, thanks. So as we hop in to a little bit of discussion here, I'd like to remind everyone in terms of raising hand features on the lower right hand screen, you should see the reactions bar. And if you wanted to make a comment, please go ahead and raise your hand so it'll get my attention. If you'd like to make a comment as well, you could also type your name in the chat saying you'd like to name a comment, and that'll ping me as well. And then just to start us off with the discussion questions, looking at number 1, what actions can be taken to make it easier for residents and local businesses to lower their emissions related to transportation? Do we have any comments related to that prompt? Okay, Henry, I see you raising your hand. Would you like to make a comment?
Just wanted to say that one thing that COVID has taught us is that a lot of wonderful stuff can happen like this particular event virtually. Now, as people have said, it's much nicer to meet in the present, but if businesses could make it easier for people to do their work at home and maybe commute less frequently, that would be a very good contribution to the reduction of vehicle emissions.
Thanks a lot, Henry. Going by the order I saw them pop up on. Let's go with Bill next, and then Albert.
Hi, my name is Bill Pugh. I'm with the Coalition for Smarter Growth, and our group's done work in Prince George's and elsewhere in the region for a while. And one of the strategies that is probably the most powerful with transportation emissions is land use and putting residents and businesses in places, parts of the county where they don't need to drive as much. So walkable, compact communities near transit. Prince George's has a lot of Metro and future Purple Line stations where there's development capacity. So if you look at residents in outlying areas of the county, they probably drive about 50% more, or generate about 50% more greenhouse gas emissions, or in some of the unwalkable areas like activity centers that like Conterra, Westphalia, even though they're activity centers, they're not walkable like some of the ones that are served by transit. So that can be a big strategy right there that's not listed.
Thanks, Bill. Albert, and then Patrick, Maddie, and then Lily.
Yes, I was wondering. There are a number of manufacturers that have really committed that they're going to go to almost all electric vehicles. I mean, Chevrolet, General Motors being one. And to go along with that, I mean, you mentioned at one point the county was getting electric vehicles, and they were going to put in 3 charging stations. There are going to need to be a lot more charging stations in order to accommodate the increase in the electric vehicles. And also, I don't know if there's going to be any kind of incentives that are going to be offered to businesses and residents for actually buying the electric vehicles, and I was wondering if you knew anything about that. Hello?
Thanks, Albert. That comment has been recorded.
Okay.
Josh, can I just jump in?
Yep.
Are you seeing the discussion question slide or kind of the messy notes slide? I want to make sure it's.
I'm seeing the discussions question side.
Okay, great.
Yep. Yep.
Thanks.
Patrick, do you have a comment?
Yeah, thanks. I'm sorry, I'm getting ready after this to go for a run, so I have my camera off. But and I want to echo what Bill said about smart growth and thinking about land use. But as part of that, I think it's critical to also think about affordable land use because as one of it's been documented, especially as a problem in California, but I think it's true in our region as well, that people are continuously are more and more having to drive further and further out to find affordable places to live. And as we in Prince George's County, as we see housing get less and less affordable, I think we're going to drive a lot of the people that have to work in Prince George's County further out to live. So I think incorporating affordable housing and being strategic about where affordable housing goes, making sure that activity centers and transit centers include affordable housing is important. I also just want to make a pitch because it's what I do for a living, for bicycle infrastructure and making sure that as we create activity centers that they are bikeable and walkable, and that we make sure that there are safe ways for people to walk and bike within activity centers in between them.
Thanks, Patrick. We have Maddie and then Lily and Tom and then Susan.
Hi, this is Maddie. I work for the city of Bowie. And so there is a couple of things. First and foremost, I hope that the county is looking at what the city of Bowie's climate action plan is doing. We just had ours done 2020. It was ratified by the county, by the city council. So, and we talk about transportation there a bit. But one of the things that I want to talk about is EV infrastructure and how important. Somebody mentioned about how 3 charging stations are not enough. You're right, they're not. I know for a fact that part of my job is to bring infrastructure, EV infrastructure into the city. Currently, we are having 2 public EV charging stations being put into our city facilities, and we have 2 private, in other words, for city use only. But the more that people go and buy EV cars, the more we need infrastructure. And I think that that's an important thing that we have to look at and where we want to put it. And then the other thing I want to talk about is mass transit. I hear a lot about how the county has a lot of mass transit. Well, I can tell you, having lived in Bowie all my life, we don't have a lot of mass transit. And so the idea that we want to bring folks to live in these mixed use, I think is a great idea. But for those that don't, we need to have mass transit. And unfortunately, the more I look at what WMATA and, the Metro and everything, they're reducing their how many lines they have. So we have to really kind of think about how to bring these guys to the table to talk about, well, if we want to increase mass transit, then we need to have their cooperation and collaboration, at least in areas where they don't really have a big presence. That's it.
Thanks, Maddie. And I just want to acknowledge, I've seen a couple of comments in the chat from Kira, Adrienne, and I just want to know that those are also being recorded. Going in order, Lily, Tom, and then Susan.
Hi, thank you. I had a question before I can really think about this issue, because transportation is producing so many greenhouse gas emissions. You had that slide earlier where there were cars are part of it and delivery buses and delivery vehicles and then trucks. So what is the relative contribution? Because it seems like a whole lot of the discussion is about cars and maybe a little bit about electrifying delivery vehicles. And I don't know the relative contribution of those 3 areas.
Yeah.
That's a great question, Lily. I can, so the greenhouse gas inventory that we have numbers from comes from MWCOG, Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. And in that inventory, there isn't specific breakout into the different types of road transportation. However, from working on a variety of other transportation projects, it is primarily light duty vehicles. If you're talking about the vehicle miles traveled, that makes up the vast majority of that VMT, vehicle miles traveled, which contributes significant emissions.
And I can only imagine that's increased during the pandemic.
Yeah. Right. All the news.
Tom, Susan, and then John and Jane.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I have two things to comment on. Lily, kind of let you know I'm on the Air Quality Control Advisory for the Maryland Department of Environment. And 60% of the emissions problems that we have come from small engines. And so one thing we can all do, and small engines are from buses on down to weed whackers. So one thing we can do is we can actually try and encourage people to use electric battery powered yard and garden type equipment, and try and not travel as much. To answer Albert and Maddie's question about infrastructure on the electric charging, I think you're incorrect on having to have infrastructure other than in your home, at your home. I've had my wife's had a electric vehicle for 5 years. 99% of the time we charge it at home. It has a not charging distance, has a distance of roughly 300 miles, the car does. And we charge it overnight. It charges at the rate of roughly 25 miles an hour. And when you buy an electric car, you're going to have to build the installation that costs to have a charger at your house into the purchase of the car. And it will run you anywhere, depending on the car and what type it is, anywhere from maybe $500 to $1,000. And as I said, the only time will we ever use a charger that's not at home, it's on road trips up and down the East Coast. So you may not need as many out in the hinterland, and you may just have to have a charging station at your home. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Susan?
I always remember, unmute. When speaking about jog, something that I remember reading in AARP, so I'm giving myself away here, about livable communities. When I hear about, the biking and the walking and all that, is for a certain segment of the population necessarily, not everybody is necessarily into that or capable of certain things. And so some of the things I've seen seem to be geared more to the groups of younger, middle-aged, in that group. And that's really good too. But AARP highlighted in one of their issues some livable older communities that are affordable. I have to say, emphasize affordable, not some of the high-priced ones where you go to retire and all, but actually communities in the community, sections in the community that are geared toward those who are older, maybe some more incapacitated to a certain degree, to different degrees, and also those who have other kinds of are disabled in some way. And I think that's a concept to sort of, I guess they're like neighborhoods within neighborhoods, if you will, and the livable, walkable. You're not going to find some people like riding on the main road on their bikes, but they'll still be biking around, for example, in a sort of a smaller capacity. And I think that that's something to think about too, that would really help with the livable aspect of the communities and cutting down on, lowering emissions and all that. But remember that there are people who aren't going to be so much actively rowing or doing some of the other things that would be as part of the livable communities.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you.
John and Jane? Looks like you're unmuted.
Did you say John? I didn't hear John.
Yeah, John and Jane.
Okay. Two comments. There's been a number of people talking about EV chargers or charging stations. the city of Greenbelt has been working with a couple of different organizations or companies to install them in Greenbelt. The main problem is the county. We've been working with Pepco. We've got 4 chargers installed for the public, and they've been sitting there waiting for the county to provide permits. And I know when we got our solar system on our house, that was the major problem, the county. And we've got a number of residents and cooperatives in that installing solar, and it's the county that's the permitting department. They need to streamline the permitting process, and they need to hire more people that know what they're doing, that you know, can get this working properly. The second comment I made a comment in the chat about it. I would like the county to send a letter of recommendation to the state to encourage the state to participate in the Transportation and Climate Initiative, the TCI, which operates similar to the existing Northeast Greenhouse Gas Reduction Initiative. It's a cap and invest program, and it has fossil fuel providers that are selling fossil fuels that contribute to greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation sector, and they would have a cap of the greenhouse gas emissions that they can give, and it keeps getting stricter and stricter and stricter, just like the Northeast Greenhouse Gas Initiative worked with power plants. This would work in the transportation sector. It would provide funding then for different communities and governments to buy electric vehicles, install the electric infrastructure, you know, as well as transit and different things. So I encourage all of you to write to your representatives and encourage that that the county and write directly to the state as well participate in the TCI. There's Virginia, DC, and I think it's Rhode Island that are already that have already agreed to participate in it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Being mindful, it looks like we have around 5 minutes left. I'd like to open up the floor to any more discussion questions. Looking at prompt number 2, are there any existing actions that can be scaled up? What new actions are needed? And prompt 3 as well, what challenges need to be overcome to make the implementation of these actions possible? I thank you guys for the robust discussion so far. Patrick?
Yeah, in terms of existing actions that need to be scaled up, I'd say the investment in complete streets and biking and walking infrastructure, which is happening, but happening slowly.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. Albert and then Tom.
Yes. You know, it hasn't come up, but I'm really concerned somewhat about this maglev train. I mean, I know it's going to do a lot of environmental damage as it's being built, and it's not going to have any benefit to Prince George's County at all. And there's a lot of ways that we can make transportation better within the county and within the whole metropolitan area here without that train. It would, and you know, it just to me seems like it's just a lot of money that's going to be going into that, and it's going to have a lot of environmental impact.
And order for higher economic people.
Yeah.
Thanks, Albert. Tom, and then Kay Creighton's iPhone. Apologies.
Yeah, well, I'd like to talk to Albert's case about the maglev. I mean, a lot of the money is going to come from private investors on the maglev. As far as the environmental impact study, I'm not sure, is it fully out yet? I'm not sure. It will provide jobs in the county. That was one thing it will do. They're talking about having a maintenance facility that will employ anywhere from 400 to 700 people that will employ people that are not just temporary jobs, they're permanent jobs. And it will take cars off the road. Now, we can argue the numbers all day long, but as long as you're taking cars off the road, and I'm not against people that are against the maglev. If you want to get rid of the maglev, that's fine. My thing is we need some kind of rail system in America. You can call it maglev, you can upgrade the current system, My wife takes the train in from where we live into the District of Columbia, takes the car off the road. Then again, it's an electric car, but it still takes the car off the road. So we can argue all day, but to throw just to be against something, just to be against something, it's not problem solving. So that's great. You're against the maglev. I appreciate that, but please come up with an alternative. That's what I want to see, an alternative to the maglev. And if you guys got great ideas, please put them forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Being mindful of time, Susan, Maureen, and if there are any other comments, please leave them in the chat. These are all be recorded for the public record.
I would say that you need to look, the DEIS is out. The comment period currently ends April 22nd on Earth Day, by the way. And I would say there are a lot of arguments against it. First of all, we're not NIMBY, just want to make it clear. We are not NIMBY. There are a lot of holes in everything they're saying in the DEIS. They can't quantify jobs, etc. The maintenance facility to which you refer will wipe out natural areas that provide oxygen, etc., plants, and all of those things, and it will destroy habitat, which is not what part of this is, what we're trying to do with dealing with climate change, etc. We need that habitat. And there is other built environment on the different waterways, etc. So this is not the answer. We are in favor of mass transit. We support working with Amtrak, the changes and things they're making with Acela and other things, but it's not mass transit. It's not helping the people. And it's not, in general, it's not doing anything that is enhancing the environment. So take a look at some of our work and you'll see it's not just NIMBY. That's not what we're talking about. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Maureen, and then we'll have to leave it at that. We have about 50 seconds left before we're going to get.
Okay, well, I second all the anti-maglev sentiment, and I'm a naturalist, and I do a lot of citizen science volunteer work at Patuxent, and that place will be destroyed. Maglev is an environmental disaster. We have plenty of other choices. But anyway, I also had a question about, can the county do more education about like people idling their car? In my neighborhood in Bowie, there are so many people who let their cars idle, and the use of electric like mowers and ways that the county can boost that information educationally, but also whatever other things that.
So welcome everyone. We're just going to wait a couple of moments for more people to join the breakout rooms. Also want to remind people that they can also turn on their video if they'll like. It's going to be a very, community-like discussion. So feel free to put your video on. All right, so for the sake of time, we're just going to go ahead and start. So as you all know, this is the breakout room for renewable energy. And also, I just want to remind people that after this discussion, so after the presentation, we're going to have an open floor discussion. And in that open floor discussion, if you would like to speak, all you have to do is click on the toolbar. It says reactions. And then once you click reactions, it'll show the option to raise your hand. So anybody who's raising their hand first, I'll unmute them, and then they can be able to speak. So with that, Deborah, you can go ahead and begin your presentation.
Great. I will be very quick. Mostly wanted to get to hearing from you all, but we did want to just tee up the conversation a little bit. So hopefully you can see my screen. So the goal of the conversation for the next 30 minutes or so is really this high level. What opportunities do you see to increase the use of renewable energy in Prince George's County? And we'd love to hear kind of any and all ideas on the table. As a little bit of context for the conversation, just wanted to go over the current sources of electricity in the county. For those of you who maybe aren't familiar, the vast majority coming from a combination of gas, coal, and nuclear. About 3% comes from wind currently, and then
Entonces, el 3% viene de vientos.
And then solar being about, or in that wedge of other, in that 3%. When we talk about renewable energy sources, we're primarily talking about wind, solar, and hydro. There are some other, sources and innovations always going on, but those are primarily what we're talking about. And then I did just want to highlight some progress to date. There has been effort, certainly over time, to increase the amount of renewable energy. So for example, the county has been working on solar installations. To date, have installed over 1 megawatt of solar on government properties, with plans to install another 4 megawatts over the next 2 years. These installations include a solar carport at the Wayne K. Curry Administration Building, which is this image here on the slide. And there's also a partnership with Prince George's County Public Schools to install solar. There's a current clean energy grant program that provides assistance to residents to encourage solar PV, so solar electricity, as well as solar water heaters. And there are financial incentives up to $10,000 to cover the costs associated with installing solar PV. So again, I wanted to be very brief in teeing up the conversation, but would encourage folks to maybe think at multiple levels about what it would mean to encourage more renewable energy. So at the building level, either a building, a home, how do we encourage more property owners to install or procure renewable energy? At the community level, are there ways that we can facilitate more community scale purchases and development of clean energy? So across, across a neighborhood or community. And then at the grid level, kind of at that systems level, how do we increase the amount of clean energy across the entirety of the energy system? So again, just wanted to tee up some thoughts about how we might think about this at these different scales. But Brendan, I will let you facilitate the conversation.
Thank you, Deborah. You can actually put down the screen as well. All right, and with that, just as I mentioned before, if anyone would like to speak, please raise your hand and I'll unmute you. All right, so Lori, I'm going to unmute you.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of things. Building more solar farms or solar arrays for community solar, like we have in Fort Washington, where 1,000 families are sharing that electricity. Putting more arrays on parking lot structures in shopping centers and so forth. And also on a more of a community level, there are like buying clubs where like 80 people decide to put solar in their home all at the same time. And they get economy of scale, they get a cheaper price because they're all using the same solar installer like in the same month. And I know Prince George's County did one of those maybe 5 years ago. So those are just a couple of ideas I have for solar.
All right, thank you. And Soren?
Hi, I just had some questions. I put one in the chat, but I could just ask it. Well, I have multiple. The first one is there any data that says one renewable source is going to be more helpful for homes, or one is going to be more helpful for business, or not business, buildings? And like, is there any research or data that would support that?
I mean, in general, when we're talking about at the home scale, you're mostly talking about solar. There's very few opportunities for residential wind. They exist, but I think on a big scale, it's usually solar at that residential scale. Yeah, resources like wind and hydro tend to be more community and grid scale.
Okay, and one more. Building like renewable energy farms, like the solar farms and all that stuff, is there a way that would damage, like, I don't know that it would do more damage, but would it mitigate the damage that it would take to build them, you know?
In terms of, yeah, the energy, right? So
Right.
the ideal is that we get to a clean energy grid that that manufacturing is using, you know, drawing from clean energy. But yes, I mean, in general, the life cycle analysis of a solar panel is still positive in terms of environmental impacts, and most most studies that I've ever seen. But yes, we would ideally like to get to the point where we have a cleaner grid so that manufacturing is also supported by clean energy.
I was more asking about, like, what would you do with the plants that are sustaining us now? Would you tear it down, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big question. I would love to hear other people's thoughts on what we would call stranded assets when you already have fossil fuel generators online.
Right, and thank you for those questions. Sean Bell, I'm going to ask you to unmute. All right.
Good evening. My name is Sean. I'm 18 and I live up in Marlboro. I joined in the room a little late, and I don't know if somebody exactly talked about solar panels, but I read an article the other day basically saying that a school system in Arkansas, they put solar panels on all their school buildings and were able to, you know, put a raise to teachers' jobs, you know, from the, you know, saving the energy costs of using solar panels. And so I'm thinking, for PG County, could we possibly do that? Maybe not on the older school buildings, as they do need to be revamped, but such as the new buildings that are getting revamped in PG County. And then I was thinking that I remember I visited Scotland in 2019, I think it was, and as I was in the plane, we saw a whole rack of wind turbines, and I'm thinking, how are we going to use wind energy in Maryland? Offshore wind farms, you know, on-land wind farms and stuff like that. And then I also thought of the idea of hydropower, using downhill rivers to, you know, gain energy from hydropower. And then you have nuclear energy. Even though people hear the word nuclear, they think of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, but in actuality, it's not that, of course. That's the lowest levels of greenhouse emissions and some of the highest outputs of energy, you know, for regions.
All right, thank you for your comments. Anybody else? Would anyone else like to speak? Kurt, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Yes, hello everyone. So I'm a senior student at the University of Maryland, and I was curious because the university is currently going through a process to get a new power plant. And of course, that impacts not only the students at the University of Maryland, but a decent part of College Park and Hyattsville. So I was curious to know if this plan has had any consultation or consideration of what that power plant will look like and how it will be integrated into the climate action plan.
Deborah, would you like?
Not to date, but that, yeah, we'll definitely take that back to the commission to discuss.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, thank you, Kurt. VJ, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Yes. So I just have a question, which is, you know, for any renewable energy solution that we do implement, what's the level of relationship or interaction we would have to have with PEPCO, who owns the transmission and distribution across the grid within the county?
Yeah, I mean, the influencing of the utility and what that looks like really can vary in different places and depending on what you're trying to do. And, you know, one of the things we talked about in the guiding principles is the solution actionable, feasible? Does it, and built into that is to what extent can the county control and influence and get that action done? And so for any particular action, absolutely. How much does it require influencing an outside party, whether that's a utility, a state agency, a federal agency, all of which have some level of regulatory authority over the grid. So I think as communities think about what they can do with renewable energy, you can kind of think of it as concentric circles. There are the things that are more in your control. And then as you get bigger, as you talk about grid scale, it moves out of your control. And that's where you kind of have to decide, is it a high enough priority that that's where you really are going to try to influence and change those other actors versus focusing on things that are more in your control, which might be putting solar on county-owned buildings. So I would love to hear more discussion from you all on that kind of trade-off and what experiences have been so far.
All right, and thank you for that question. Next, I'm going to call on Armando. He let me know through the chat that he would like to speak.
Hey, thank you, Brandon. Sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand, and
no worries.
Funny enough, been using Zoom all over time, but yeah. So like my question or my comment was if governments would consider to support community choice energy, community choice aggregation, as it is one powerful way to just switch the whole county over to renewable energy and make sure that county sources the renewable clean energy that we all want to see. And making also possible for all residents to save a little bit, most likely, as the county will be able to purchase in bulk from suppliers or from the grid operators. That would be one question, and then the other one is there are so many places where we should put solar, and oftentimes I think that incentives are not there to make that work. So I was just wondering if the climate action plan also includes some budget recommendation on types of incentives to make solar projects actually possible, feasible, when it almost seems that it might be working and there is the willingness and the opportunity to do it, but at the end of the day, it just doesn't work out financially for the property owner or for the solar company.
Armando, the answer on that second question is absolutely. There's the climate action can identify necessary financial incentives and other financing mechanisms that are needed to get to the desired goals. So I would love to hear if you can tell me more about the kinds of projects that don't seem to have the right incentives in place to make them work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oftentimes, I mean, there are so many parking lots, as someone else has mentioned, where there are, there is plenty of opportunity to build there and have zero environmental impact because there is not a green space, but it's already environmentally disturbed. But those structure costs a lot. As and then the other thing is, a lot of warehouses and industrial parks may have large rooftops, but don't have the structure to hold those in place, and they need repairs and they need upgrades. So kind of bridging the gap of utilizing those large rooftops or parking lots and kind of help a little bit the solar industry and the property owner to make it all work on those sides. And oftentimes it's the county that kind of leverage a little bit of its own purchasing power and kind of leads the way, and then others will follow.
All right, thank you, Armando. I'm gonna unmute Stanley next since he hasn't spoken yet.
Hello. What I was going to say is more of a comment because, like, I have solar panels on my house and I rent them. and I pay $40 a month, but it has reduced my electric bill overall quite a bit. Even this, my house is 1,800 feet, and I did insulate my attic, but my electric bill this winter was only $100 and some at max. And most of the year it's around 30 or 40, and I pay $40 a month to rent them. That $40 a month, the company that I rent them from takes care of all the maintenance, and they insure the roof in case something happens. And if they need to be replaced, the company does that. The other thing I do is through BG&E, I get my electricity supplied through clean energy, which is all solar and wind. And I think the more people do that, you don't necessarily have to invest in a whole lot of other things for your house. But if you choose a clean energy supplier, that makes the companies like BG&E and Pepco buy clean energy more and more, which supports clean energy all the way. And I think those are good ideas. And actually, it saves you so much money to put the panels on and even renting them. So I think it's worth it. And if people consider that, that'd be great. And I like the fact that the county intends to put more up. They have plenty of space. There's a lot of roof on county and city garages and buildings that put solar panels. And then even could supply the community. That's me. That's all I'm saying.
Stanley, do you think if the financial package makes sense, do you think it's an education problem?
Yeah, I mean, I see it with so many things. When I put my panels up, 2 more neighbors did, but I couldn't convince a couple of others in the neighborhood to do it. And I don't see many here in Laurel, but there are up here, and it really is education. I mean, here in Laurel, we have the city picks up our compost and composts it. They're begging for people to come to sign up for the program. They give you everything, but people don't even know about it. And when they do, they don't, it's like, is this extra work? Well, not really. You know, you're going to throw this stuff out. You might as well put it in a compost container and take it to the curb. So yeah, education has to be better. I think here at the county and city levels, I don't see the education being very good. I don't see much telling people how they get out to the community. We have the Laurel Leader, which is the newspaper that most people leave in their driveway, and it just creates more trash. But people don't know about it, no matter how much they try.
Thank you, Stanley.
So, thank you.
Thank you. Next will be Tom.
Hi. I just wanted to elaborate a little bit more on that. The education was one of the things I was going to mention. Not just educating people on their options in the home, but how about in the schools, particularly the high schools? Is there a part of this program that really will be geared towards teaching the kids about how to do the kinds of options that are available, as well as teaching them about climate change in general? Because I've had opportunity on occasion to go into the climate the science fair at Eleanor Roosevelt, and I work in climate science. So one of the things I do usually is the environmental group, and I try to talk to the kids as much as I can about it. And sometimes I get really good answers, and sometimes kids are not as, I should say, not kids, students. Sometimes they really give good answers, sometimes not. But I think that ought to be a key to it, because it's their future, especially.
Yeah, and I can say there are several people on the Climate Action Commission who are very connected into the school system and have talked a lot about that. Certainly within the project, and the work that Cadmus is doing, things like curriculum development are not part of that. But there's been a lot of talk, for example, about how to get students involved in looking at the data related to the greenhouse gas inventory, for example, maybe in doing assessments of their schools for solar, or doing even the financial kind of assessment. And there are a couple of commissioners in particular who are very much thinking about that.
And Deb, let me know if you want me to chime in on any of the school system items.
Go for it. Yeah.
So a few of the things that came up in the last few minutes, and it's really, I'm Donald Bell, one of the environmental literacy outreach educators with the William Schmidt Center, our outdoor and environmental education center for Prince George's County Public Schools. And it's really great to hear all of the conversation and the enthusiasm around making sure that our students are educated. And so I'll try to go into order. A while back, this was several questions ago, but someone mentioned solar panels on schools. And there was a partnership where 3 schools do have solar panels at their facility on the roof system now. And so we're looking for more information regarding the returns of those systems, but that was implemented in the last few years. And so I'm certainly looking forward to more of the new construction leaning in that direction. And there was a comment about the Laurel area and the composting. And so one of the positive things, I work with the Laurel High School Green Club, and they were the first high school to really initiate a composting program associated with their cafeteria. And it was a few weeks before the school shut down because of COVID, unfortunately. And so they do look forward to getting back to participating in the composting when things return back to normal. And I don't want to take up too much time, but there is a Prince George's County School climate work group that is being initiated. It was just voted on by the Board of Education a few days ago to move to final stages before it is activated. And so they'll be working alongside this climate commission, trying to make sure that our school system is more green. And the last thing is, if you look at MAO, Maryland Association for Environmental and Outdoor Education, you can get a list of all of the green schools, because I saw that in the chat, someone asking about which green schools that we have in the county.
Thank you, Donald. We obviously only have a minute left. I don't know if anyone has a short comment. I'll unmute Nina.
Yes, okay, really quickly, I think that education for consumers on solar panels is really important, but I think more importantly, our grid-wide, our county-wide solutions. This county has 3 or 4 power plants. That's like a third of the state's power plants. We have to have some sort of agency in making these power points cleaner, especially like Chalk Point, that is oil and petroleum, and it's a public health problem. So I think that the cap should include some sort of information about recommendation of either not using coal or like new regulations for coal. Also, I think it'd be cool if the county maybe tried to implement or create like in-county carbon offset projects to sort of like bring money into the county and also get co-benefits for the county, because we have so many power plants and it's not quite fair that we have all this pollution and we're not getting.
This is being recorded, and in the event that you don't want to make a verbal comment, feel free to use the chat, because we'll also be capturing those comments there for the record. So I will turn it over to Dave Hampton to give us a little bit of context, and we will jump right into questions and discussion.
Thank you, Gabrielle. I appreciate that. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. So just as a reminder, our session goal is to see what opportunities you see to enhance climate adaptation and resiliency in Prince George's County. So hopefully you heard my spiel during the main room, so we can kind of jump right into that. Just as a refresher, climate change impacts on Prince George's County. Hopefully you all heard this, but extreme winter, drought, flooding, severe storms, and extreme heat. I think those are fairly self-explanatory. And what is at risk, as I mentioned during the main presentation, assets, systems, and populations. Don't worry too much about the classifications, but we do it this way to make sure that we remember that there's the big stuff, the dams, the bridges, the facilities like schools, fire stations, hospitals, police stations, systems, which is services. So I would say this is networks, the electrical grid, the entire electrical grid. So that's a set of substations, right? The whole system, a public school system, right? Because you've got the individual school buildings, but you've got the system itself. Social services can be another system, and then populations, which is vulnerable groups of people, such as elderly, low income, people with disabilities or chronic illnesses. And once again, just as a reminder, adaptation actions, you've got the guiding principles, and you want to have strategies that are actionable by the county, that are under the county's control. There were some comments that were collaborating with other communities, which I think is a great point, but it ultimately has to start in a place that the county can actually act on it. So this is an example, again, the strategy is in the blue bar and the action is below it, such as a needs assessment or a heat health module as part of a training or education. And then some sort of a time frame. You know, we just put this on here, but ultimately we'll have to come up with a time frame that makes sense. I wouldn't get too bogged down in that. We just kind of want to get those big ideas going. So for discussion questions, what critical assets, systems, and populations are most important? Is there anything that's missing? Are there existing actions that you know of that the county is doing or your city is doing within the county that can be scaled up? What new actions might be needed? And what challenges do we have to overcome to implement these actions? So with that, I think we can just open it up to discussion.
Perfect. And I also have these questions noted. So let's see. Dave, do you mind taking down the slide deck just so we can get everyone on screen? And then if necessary, we'll ask, to pull the questions back up.
Sure.
But welcome everyone again, just in case you were just coming into the room. We just had Dave Hampton kind of give us an overview and provide some context for today's discussion. We have about 20 minutes in this room to answer any questions or, field any discussion regarding adapting to climate change. So I encourage everyone to use your raise hand function, if you would like to make a verbal comment, and just be mindful, we do want to get as many voices as possible in the room. So just be mindful of your comments so that it can be succinct so we can invite everyone into the room. So from what I see, I will start with Mr. Brown, John H. Brown. I'll unmute you so that you can make your comment. One second. All right, you're unmuted.
Oh, you're good, good. Well, one of the problems that affects almost everybody in suburbia, and that includes most of Prince George's County, is lawns. If you had a transition from lawns to meadows and that could be enforced by a banning of the pesticides and herbicides that control the grass on our lawns. If we transferred that into meadows, you wouldn't have the severe flooding problem because so much of the rain would be absorbed.
Duly noted. Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. All right, I'm seeing Denise. I'll unmute. All right, you're in the room, Denise.
Hi, so my name is Denise, and my two concerns / questions are, how will sustainable land use be implemented into the climate action planning? And also, how will BIPOC, so that's Black, Indigenous, people of color, will be brought into the decision-making processes of the climate action plan early enough and not as an afterthought? Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Denise. And just as a reminder, all of these comments are being recorded, so we'll be here for the record. I see Mark has his hand up, so I will ask him.
Speaking of heat, as you all remember, on a very hot day, go out into the local woods and it's 10 to 15 degrees cooler. So for equity and so forth with the heat problems, adaptation to that, let's just bring back the forest.
Great. And I also saw that mentioned in the large group chat as well, and I saw a lot of people nodding their head in agreement. So greatly appreciated, Mark. I see Louisa.
Yes, hi everybody. Something that's a really easy thing that we can all do is when we get our electricity bill, is let Pepco know that you want your energy to come from renewable sources. So you can choose wind or solar, local wind or further away wind. And even if the electrons that are coming to your house may or may not be directly from renewable energy, at least you're supporting renewable energy somewhere near here. And that's really easy. It's like you check a couple boxes on your Pepco receipt, and that way we could all be getting our electricity from renewable sources.
Greatly appreciated, Louisa. I see Marori. I'm not sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name right. I'll unmute.
Marjorie, you say you
Marjorie, my apologies. Go ahead, Marjorie.
I just want to mention paying attention to trees. Forests are always one of my issues, and making sure we aren't cutting down any more trees than we absolutely have to, and protecting our forests. And I'm concerned about things like places where all these vines grow up the trees and we just let them go and then they kill the trees, etc. So just to make us remember to think about forests and how to preserve trees.
Greatly appreciated. I saw Dave with his hand up, but then we'll move to Mike, Mr. Brown, and then Mark in that order. So go ahead, Dave.
Oh, yeah, I had my hand up because I just want to say you folks are on fire. That's pun intended. But I do want to push you folks a little bit to brainstorm the action. So when it comes to the strategy and the action, think about having a strategy under which a number of actions can fall. So some great comments about trees, great comment about lawns, you know, is it sequestering carbon? So is it a big or overarching strategy such as sequestering carbon or increasing shaded areas? There was another comment about it's cool, you know, 10 degrees cooler in the shade kind of thing. So think about things that can fall under there, because we're going to have a finite set of actions that the county is going to be able to consider. So if you can have a bigger overarching strategy and then smaller actions under that, that'll be helpful for us. But let me give you folks the floor.
I appreciate that framing, Dave. All right, so we'll move in that order. We had Mike, John, and Mark, and then we also have other people with their hands raised, so we'll move right into it. Go ahead, Mike. 1 second, you're still on mute. There you are.
There we go. So my thoughts are two. One, on this great conversation about trees and forests, the overarching piece that would make sense would be to have a countywide goal of no net loss of trees. Right now, there is some regulations from the state and from the county, but they don't apply to private land. And that's where most of the development occurs. That's where most of our trees get cut down. So having a countywide requirement that if you want to get a building permit, even if it's on private ground, you need to make sure that you're replacing those trees of like kind or better, meaning indigenous trees that'll grow in this habitat. And secondly, along the same lines, one of the greatest risks I think people identified was heat in the inside the beltway, and the many of our communities there, our Latino communities, and our other lower income communities, they don't have street trees like or get planted out in all the suburbs. So a requirement from the state, from the county, to say that we're going to replace or we're going to plant trees in our hottest neighborhoods, then we can start to make some progress. That'll absorb water during rain events and stop flooding. They help facilitate good soil. They take carbon out of the air as carbon sequestration, and they mitigate the heat island effect that occurs in most of those communities. And the county should have a specific goal. The number that comes to mind to me is 500,000 trees planted inside the Beltway within the next 5 years.
Thank you for framing that comment in actionable steps and as a strategy. Greatly appreciated, Mike. All right, so the order we had laid out before was Mark, then John, and I see Bianca has her hand raised as well, so we'll get you right after.
Okay, I'm responding to Marjorie. Do you remember what Marjorie asked?
Marjorie, in regards to trees?
She asked about pines taking down the trees. The answer, my friend, is very simple. When I was a park ranger with Parks and Planning, we went ahead and saved almost the entire mile of Thrift Road from any trees ever falling down for 10 years. 3 of us worked for about 5 hours. All you do is go to where the invasive vines are up the tree to strangle it, like English ivy, a Japanese honeysuckle, Oriental bittersweet, and you cut it at the base and apply a little herbicide to the cut stump, and that's it. It's so easy. It takes 10 minutes, 10 minutes to save a tree. Now, if we have staff, Parks and Planning doing this, we do have to make sure and make a note of this caveat that the native vines don't cause trees to come down. So they have to know what they're doing. Just remove the non-native invasive vines. And I'm just pointing out it's so easy, Marjorie, to solve that problem. So let's just do it.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate the response directly to Marjorie. All right, John, we'll move to you and then to Bianca.
Yeah, I have a strange, what will seem strange to a lot of you, but there is a organization which brings in goats to attack kudzu and other invasive species that strangle trees. They operate in Tennessee. They operate in various places. It's curious, but it really works, and the goats love it.
Well, Atkins Arboretum does that, but I want to let one thing clear about using goats. You must monitor them so they don't start eating the native plants. You must move them along.
Yes, that's right. I agree.
Duly noted, duly noted. All right, so we're bringing Bianca if she still has a comment, and I noticed that someone in the chat said that Irma also had her hand up. So once Bianca goes, Irma, you'll be right next.
Hi, I just wanted to, and if this has already been brought up, my apologies, but I wanted to ask if there has been any talk around reducing emissions from the food the state procures. Has that been thought about when addressing the greenhouse gas emissions that are associated with Maryland's food purchases? I know that the University of Maryland has pledged to reducing their food-related greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by 2030. Has that been thought about around just like around climate change and mitigating the impacts? Because I know that climate change will impact low-income communities in a destructive manner. So I was just wondering what talk has been about that, or if that has been looked into as a solution.
Great. Dave, is there a response to it, or is it still just taking more as a recommendation or consideration?
That is a great, excuse me, that's a great point. I am not aware of that. I don't know to what degree, but we will certainly note that. I think, Bianca, were you talking specifically about the transport or the production, or probably both?
Yeah, both of them.
Both, sure.
Yeah, both. Yeah, either or. Both are great.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fantastic point, you know, in terms of crafting strategies. So if you're increasing the ability of local urban farms, that's been a movement that's sweeping lots of cities, lots of urban areas, increasing the areas for urban farms, rooftop gardens. So reducing those food miles. I once worked on an urban food garden on a roof in Chicago, and you couldn't get more local than 16 feet up. So that's a potential. So maybe linking those together, you know, in terms of production, local production, and distribution. If distribution is reduced greatly by producing locally, I think scaling the production for large organizations is always a challenge, right? So if you have, one of the challenges that we had was the school system couldn't use food, this was in 2010, couldn't use food that was grown on site because it was not tested, it couldn't be tracked. And now I don't know if that's changed, but that's certainly something that could be looked into. But that's a great suggestion.
Great. I think we're moving into about 7 minutes left in the breakout room. So I know that Irma had her hand up, and I also want to be mindful of, you know, looking in the chat as well as we're looking to move to a close, and just keeping everyone in mind that we're also looking towards strategies as well in our comments. So Irma, over to you.
Let me unmute myself, I'm sorry.
Not a problem.
Thank you for the person that saw my hand up. I would say you're talking about strategies that we have to talk. I think we all love trees, we all love nature, but I would say, what do you want to become for Prince George's County? Because I've been living in this country and this beautiful county for 20 years, and I see that it's becoming a concrete city. You're losing the urban area, and it's becoming metropolis, probably because you're too close to Washington, D.C. Prince George's County has most metro stations than any other county. And now you're going to have an electric, and I'm not against evolution and against development, but we have to be conscious about that. We can work hand in hand with both things. And first thing I will say, what do you want for Prince George's County? Do you want to keep the landscaping as we have now and conserve and prevent all the climate change that can we face? Because just 2 houses down where I live, with the flooding, it was a big hole from the sewer. In Washington Sanitary Commission, even we call, they don't come and clean it. So if something happened, how we as a town are going to be together with organizations, with the ones that we pay the bills, that we can work together to beautify this beautiful county. And we have to give more awareness because as when we are poor, we're not educated, we don't have a degree in something, and we cannot fight for our rights, and we cannot cooperate because we have to be integrated in order to cooperate and be better, start loving what we want, love the progress for our kids, because probably I cannot enjoy it, but someone else will enjoy it. As we say, I'm descended from Native Americans, and we say this land is not ours, it's just borrow it. So we have to keep track, and we have to love it and leave it for someone else. I would say that also we're wasteful because we have to use more solar energy individually and collectively, like parking lots that can be like farms for solar energy, and watch for flooding areas and create a green way to contain the water in order not to be flooded for the houses, etc. And I don't want to extend more, but I just want to say thank you for keeping up this workshop and this virtual meeting. But I will say the strategies, let's plant more trees, let's beautify, let's educate our kids to love their planet, to love their city where they live. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irma. And I definitely was hearing the importance of having a shared vision and mission for our county. And I definitely think that this meeting is definitely one of the foundational steps to doing that. So in the about 3 minutes we have left, I know I saw in the chat that Linda had a comment, and Marjorie, I also see your hand up. So I encourage those who may not have been able to make a verbal comment, please put your things in the chat because we will be recording them. So Linda and then likely Marjorie will be our last comment for the evening. So go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, my main point is to raise the question of public health infrastructure in the setting of disasters and to see to what extent any of this stuff overlaps with that, because clearly nobody could get a vaccination with any kind of organization. And where old people live, where poor people live, and where sick people live is not always understood. For example, when the large snowstorm came a few years ago, it was very hard to get everybody to dialysis sites and things like that. You know, so I'm interested in thinking about how expansion of public health outreach could improve some of the ability to survive some of these things if we don't prevent everything.
Thank you, Linda. Definitely crucial in times like these. All right, Marjorie, you may have our last word. So go ahead. We'll see if we have another minute or so, but see if I can get you on mute. If you look at the bottom, or you just almost did it.
Okay, I just want to say that gardens are also a good alternative for what is now lawn. Someone mentioned meadows. Yes, that's good, but gardens are another possibility. And the most recent issue of Yes Magazine, there's an article about a place that has turned a lot of their lawns right around their houses into gardens.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marjorie. Thank you all for participation and engagement. I think in the time that we have left, I'll look to the chat and see if there are any additional comments that I can raise to the group. Denise earlier said, create clear connection of climate action plan and the creation of equitable green jobs. We need sustainable land use and also protection of green spaces. Thank you, Denise. And we have about less than 60 seconds. So you all feel free to stay as I read more comments, or feel free to go back to the main room, but definitely appreciate your engagement and participation in the room. So let me see.
Thank you.
No,
Thank you,
of course.
Yeah, thanks everyone for your comments, for your engagement. Please do stick around through the process. We'd love to continue to hear your voices. Looks like we've got 29 seconds.
Right. Make sure I save this chat.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to pause for a moment just to allow everyone to get back into the room. And it looks like everyone is back. Excellent. So, again, thank you all for that. We had an opportunity to kind of peek in, and it looked like there were some very interesting conversations happening. And we really appreciate you taking, time out of your evening, from 6:30 to 8:30 to do this. And as we wrap up and talk about a little bit about next steps, I want to turn it over to Dawn, the chairperson, to talk about what's next. So Dawn, if you could come off mute and on mic, greatly appreciate it. Are you there?
Sorry about that. I had to give her the option. Dawn, you should be able to unmute now.
Thank you, Kayla. So yes, we're wrapping up, coming towards the end of the presentation this evening. I hope that everyone has found the breakout sessions to be informative and the participation process to be rewarding. So as Donzel has mentioned, the meeting has been recorded, and you will be able to view a recording at the virtual open house. I also want to encourage everyone who might have future questions and comments after this meeting to visit the website for the open house, where you can post those additional comments and questions. So this is our very first community meeting. There will be 2 additional community meetings for you to participate in the climate action plan development process. We will be sharing with you the specific dates for those future meetings in coming weeks. I think with this information that we've gathered from you this evening, our commission, in working with the consultants, will compile and synthesize the information that we've gathered and incorporate it into the next steps of the planning process. So I think that's about it for me, Donzel. If you have any additional remarks or comments?
Yep, so we put the link, Dawn, for the virtual website into the chat so everyone can copy that. And as she said, you can go visit. You will have, and it's there on the screen, you know, there is a comment box there so that you can continue to add comments. And as she indicated, once you can, you know, leave information so that we can be in touch. And once the recording is finished and edited, we put together, it will be there as well. So thank you all for joining, and we will definitely keep you informed through your registration of the next meeting of the commission, as well as the working. So thank you all so much, and please be safe and enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.
As we close, if anyone's willing, Gabrielle is going to pull up a poll. If any folks have any sort of evaluation towards the meeting, we encourage folks to fill that out as they close, if time allows.
Yes, thank you, Kayla. So if we could pull the poll up, if you could just quickly fill that out before you leave. And it's just basically rating the process of the virtual meeting.